It's the Mueller report. We're on page 137. This is the part where they're talking about Paul Manafort's association with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska being the Ukrainian-Russian oligarch who is building the steel and aluminum factory in Kentucky to help Mitch McConnell get reelected in 2020. Manafort has alleged to the office, that's the Mueller office, that he was willing to brief Deripaska, this is the guy who's helping out Mitch McConnell, only on public campaign matters, and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Page 138. Paul Manafort's two campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States is the subtitle here. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August of 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to that meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016, while in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the afternoon of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. The opposition bloc is the political entity in eastern Ukraine that's aligned with Russia. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with the subject line "Black Caviar," Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle, I'm prepared to do it. It has to do with the future of his country and is quite interesting." End quote. Page 139. Manafort identified, quote, "the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar" as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych, by the way, is the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine that Paul Manafort helped get elected. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. The rest of that sentence has been blocked out by Bill Barr. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29 email, "Tuesday, August 2nd is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City." 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back to Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Excuse me. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their version of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least three principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That would be the part of Ukraine that's mostly Russian-speaking. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the Mueller office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Six Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. Thom Hartmann here with you, and it is midweek. It's Wednesday. It's the first hour of our program, so let's start with middays with Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He also represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. Rep. Mark Pocan is his Twitter handle, his website, pocan.house.gov. And Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
And happy 4th of July, a day in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to all the listeners.
Yeah. A question I have for you, which is sort of political strategic and sort of, patriotic, American values, and I'm not sure what else, but it is being reported, and I think just kind of common sense would indicate the way that the Trump administration, they've known for apparently a couple of weeks that this report from the Inspector General that oversees the Border Patrol was going to come out and show that they've just got brutal and cruel conditions going on down there. And, they're not trying to head it off or change anything in any big substantial way. It seems like their base, their white racist, hate-filled base, is actually delighted by the fact that these kids are in cages and women and children are being told to drink out of toilets and things. Rush Limbaugh yesterday said drinking out of a toilet is better than what they're normally used to, or words to that effect. So, the base is actually loving this, and I think Trump is very happy with this publicity. How do Democrats, and for that matter, how do Americans of conscience who are shocked and horrified by refugees? These are not people coming here looking for a job. These are people fleeing, disasters in their own countries, the disasters that were largely created by the United States, between climate change and the political upheaval down there that Reagan began. How do we respond to this? How do you, and what does this say about America that you've got, probably as many as a third of Americans, the Fox News watchers and the right-wing hate radio listeners who think that, oh yeah, this is a good thing?
Well, first, it's absolutely unconscionable. I've been to some of these facilities previously, the Super Walmart Center that had 1,500 kids in it. Even then, and this is quite a while ago before they've had the capacity issues they have now, the average amount of square footage that a child had was about 40% less than a Supermax inmate. So you had that problem. Now it's even worse as far as the overcrowding, the conditions, no soap, no toothbrushes, lice infestation, go down the list. And I do think that this is Donald Trump continuing in Donald Trump's mind, which I try not to delve into too much, in order to express that he thinks this is a way to tell people not to come here. That he doesn't realize is they're leaving great violence and a lot of other issues that are far more severe, and they're willing to take the risk in order to get to a country that they see leads when it comes to freedom and opportunity and aspiration to have a family that's not going to be living in the violence they're going to live in. So it's not going to work. In fact, the surge that we've seen, so to speak, has been because he said he's going to put a border wall up. He's created this surge, and then he's handling it in the complete wrong way because previously people were left on their own recognizance with some other programs in place that were far cheaper, and 95+% were showing up to the asylum hearings. This is just so Donald Trump can try to, one, be tough, like all his dictator buddies seem to do in their countries, and two, send a message that they shouldn't come. But it's not working. So the message really is to his base, look what I'm doing, I'm with you, but I think at the end of the day, Tom, he loses on this because when I've seen polling, very, very recent polling, his message at most gets to 41%. Our message at worst gets to about 61%. Pathway to citizenship for aspiring Americans, 68%. People really do get this. They know that their family came, and they often have an immigrant in their family who worked hard to get here to have opportunity for their family. And when they see kids in these conditions, even the most hardened, even conservative voters, find this reprehensible. So he may be appealing to Rush Limbaugh. I think he already has Rush Limbaugh's support, but I think he's turning off a whole lot of other people, and we just need to keep being very aggressive and vigilant in showing the conditions and talking about what's going on.
Yeah, and what's so ironic, 2 out of 3 of his wives are immigrants. His youngest son is what Michelle Malkin used to call an anchor baby, and Melania's parents are what Donald Trump refers to as chain migration. They just got citizenship for them last year, I think it was, or the year before. It's just bizarre. Had he been a Democrat, Fox would be treating this completely differently. It would be a huge scandal, it seems to me, but. Anyhow, let's roll into middays with Mark here. If you're just tuning into the program, every Wednesday, Congressman Mark Pocan comes on first or second hour of the program and takes your calls for the hour. So whatever's on your mind, 202-808-9925, and the lines, as they say, are filling up. David in is it Kaneohe, Hawaii?
Yes. Good morning, Kaneohe, Hawaii.
Okay, thank you. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
I'd like to ask if he thinks it's possible to get some major donors to create what we could call a rapid response media fund to promote progressive issues, which that could get past the barriers of the corporate media. That's a constant theme of your talks. So with enough money, we could right through to everyone by buying advertising time on programs like Dancing with the Stars, especially sports like the Super Bowl. So, for example, your House of Representatives passed a great spending bill, but most Americans have no idea what's in it. And if we had such a thing, we could already have widely spread actual quotes from the Mueller report. We could be letting everyone know about Mitch McConnell's refusal to block foreign interference in our elections. And we also have to start promoting Medicare for all or single payer before the avalanche of confusion the health insurers are sure to bring on us.
Yeah, I think we got it, David. Let's let Congressman Pocan respond.
Yeah, David, so I don't know if there's enough money out there to try to be an equal to the corporate media that's out there. So trying to compete on that level, I think, because I think people have talked about this and tried, it would be very, very difficult. I think we just have to be smarter about how we get the messages out. I think a good example is this last week after a problematic vote we had in Congress on getting assistance to the border to help the kids who are down there. The fact that we've had the CODELs and then the Inspector General's report get the attention it's gotten on the conditions. Unfortunately, it should have happened before the vote. I think we would have been a little more successful in getting a stronger bill, which is what many of us had been advocating for. But we just have to work it differently. And as members of Congress, we have an obligation to do some of these things. And as a public, I think we have an obligation to push the corporate media to not just cover some of the stuff that they cover and fight harder. And we're going to have to use social media and programs like Tom's and others to make sure we're getting the messages out. But I just don't know if there's enough money to truly be the comparative contrast that's out there. So I think we just need to be creative but not passive in dealing with this.
David in Columbus, Ohio, listening on WGRN. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello, Congressman and Tom.
Hey, David.
There's a problem that's deep in Ohio. It's gerrymandering. It's also loss of votes. I think the recent Supreme Court decision really messed us up, and there's a period now where they're going to rewrite the election maps. And how is House Bill 1 progressing? And I guess it went through the House, but what can Democrats do to get fair elections, and can they rally support from Republicans?
Yeah, David, so we're going to break up H.R. 1 into some smaller bills and try to push those over as well and try to figure out how to get something through. The problem is Mitch McConnell's sitting on everything we send him. Every U.S. senator I talk to says the only thing they're doing is passing conservative judges, and they're not doing any legislation. So because of that, it's going to be a little bit trickier to see how that's going to be able to proceed. But I think we've got a couple good bits of information, too. 7 governorships we picked up in the last election. So they can veto maps from bad legislatures like in Wisconsin, which will help have a better outcome in our state, or we can have just hopefully the citizen panels, which is what we should be advocating for across the country. We can also make it an issue during the campaigns and make people have to respond to it and hold them accountable. We can still try to move that federal legislation, although right now we're not finding a lot of Republicans being very receptive to democracy issues. But we're going to keep pushing this, and I think if we all do this from the grassroots up and from those of us in Congress, I don't think you're going to have many people who argue it's not a good idea to have politicians drawing their own lines. We need to change that. It's not a good idea to have us drawing our lines.
Yeah, and we need to change the makeup of the Supreme Court, which means take the Senate and the White House.
And that means 2020 means a lot, too, right?
Yeah, it's gonna define the next 50 years of this country. Congressman Mark Pocan is with us, taking your calls for the hour. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan, as in representative, Rep. Mark Pocan. And we'll be right back. And welcome back. John in Auburn, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Is that me?
That's you, John.
All right. Hello, Tom. And hello, Mr. Pocan. My question has to do with why are we paying $2.5 million for a parade that is filling up his hotel and making him a ton of money over the next 3 to 4 days? And what can be done about that?
And I would add to that, why is it that apparently only the Republican Party is giving out tickets to the closest area? I mean, isn't that a violation of the Hatch Act?
Oh, I think there's going to be lots of talk about this after the fact. Unfortunately, John, it's July 3rd. They're having this all tomorrow. But the fact that we just found out they're redirecting funds that otherwise the Park Service would be using towards needed maintenance, the fact that we're finding out that they're bringing up some of these pieces of military equipment you can't even operate on the streets, much as if you should anyway, the fact that we're finding out that they're giving out tickets to the Republican Party, essentially to donors, and using it in a partisan way. If the president has a speech tomorrow that in any way is a partisan, that's going to be yet another problem. I think you can expect to see the proper oversight to happen. Unfortunately, a lot of this information is coming out fairly recently as far as some of the abuses that they're doing on the tickets and on the cost overrun to the National Park Service. But rest assured, none of us are happy, and we're going to do everything we can to make sure that this doesn't have the capacity to happen again. But on July 3rd, I think you're gonna have what you're gonna have tomorrow. Let's just see if the president has any restraint whatsoever when he speaks at the actual event.
In other words, any respect for our actual country outside of his own political party.
Can he do what he did when he read the speech when he was overseas and got all kinds of acclaim because he didn't put his foot in his mouth, or will he go back to being Donald Trump like we're used to and somehow make it partisan? And
right. We'll find out. Michael in Denver, Colorado. Michael, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan. About a minute and a half here before the break.
Okay. Yes. Good morning, gentlemen. Listen, the reason I called was I wanted to ask the congressman here, what is it in the House of Representatives when you're all together, the Democratic caucus certainly, what do you guys say about Article 1 of our Constitution? It's been dragged through the mud. You guys are not looking really well in terms of, me and so many people like me. We're a little bit more astute. We look at the Constitution. We look at how it was written. We look at the separation.
Michael, what's your point?
Branches. Well, what I'm asking is what is it that you are not doing to defend Article 1 of the Constitution? That is where everything happens.
The first among equals. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Congressman?
Yeah, so, Michael, I would a bit disagree with your question in that last night, I've heard people on literally a talk program refer to Article 1, that we're Article 1. In fact, Bill Pascrell, it was. I heard last night say that. We often say that. We point to Article 1, Section 8 that says Congress has the right to wage wars, which is why we're trying to change the AUMF, which is why we're going to have that as an amendment in the NDA. I mean, we're doing it, whether or not it gets reported or whether or not it's to your liking. I'm sorry, Michael, but we do understand that. We are putting it out there. I think the one area where there may be some disagreement is around impeachment. A lot of us want to do the inquiry, but our leadership isn't there yet.
Yeah. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, Middays with Mark, with Congressman Pocan. We'll be right back with more of your calls for him on this remarkable day before the 4th of July that it appears President Trump has hijacked. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, taking your calls for the hour. Pam in Chicago, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Tom, and hello, Congressman. I hope the background noise is not too much. I'll be really quick. First, I think the Democratic Party needs to acknowledge that Jimmy Carter, bless his heart, God bless his heart, said that this president is illegitimate, and he explained the reasons why. The message from Trump simply should be save America from Trump. We can no longer try to coddle the Republicans and the rest of Trump supporters on this message. And then lastly, I wanted to ask, what are our doing to try to get the message out? Here in Illinois, Tom, J.B. Pritzker, although a billionaire, he spent a lot of his money trying to get the message out, even about some of the legislation he wanted to get through. Tom, I feel like it's the Democratic working class and poor who have to fight the wealthy donors of the Republican Party. Also, Congressman, make sure you deal with voter suppression, because it seems like that's being knocked to the back of the classroom, Tom, and voter suppression is critical.
Okay, Pam, we've gone through three topics here. We like to limit people to one, but I think Pam's first question also, I think, was a big one, and it got partly dropped off because her phone was going in and out. Yeah. But it was she pointed out that Jimmy Carter said that Donald Trump is not a legitimate president. He was elected with the help of Russia. If the tables were turned and this was President Obama, the Republicans would be running with that like there was no tomorrow. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the very reason why all of us are trying to getting the information in the Mueller report out, and yet there's a difference on how we can best do it. We have another set of lawsuits. You saw we're now suing for the taxes because the law very clearly says we shall be able to get them. Now, I think we'll win that, but we're going to court for that. The problem is this president, again, operates differently than every other president when he blocks witnesses from coming. But I think once we have a vehicle to get that information out, and the vehicle is getting people to testify and say it, quite honestly, on TV, because that's how a lot of people are going to get this news, we're going to be able to expose the very information that we need to. Jimmy Carter is a former president. It's great that he said it because that was pretty bold, and it got a lot of media attention. But we need to get those witnesses and Mr. Mueller himself, since he is coming, to say some of what we've read in that report. Because again, far too few people have read that report. Understandably, it's a big report, but we need to get some of those key parts out so people can see just what it is. And as the caller said, his biggest fear over and over in that report is that he would be considered illegitimate. So that is something that Donald Trump knows because he got that outside support. That's why that issue is so imperative to him, and that will come out when we get those people talking. Rick in Lexington, Kentucky. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman, thanks for taking my call. My question to you is, does it surprise you that the president still has the support that he has among white America under all the other groups of people, black people, maybe 15%, Mexican, Native Americans, Asian Americans, 30 to 35%. But white America still supports this president 55 to 60%. The Republican Party supports him 85 to 90%. We can talk about any other issues you want to talk about. The most glaring issue that I see is, why is it that white America supports a president that's a bigot, a racist, a liar, and a draft dodger? And he still has the support that he has amongst white America.
And a rapist, apparently, as well. Thank you, Rick.
Thank you for adding that. Thank you.
Yeah, Rick, so I read an article, and I think this is probably, to me, it summed it up the best, which is I think there are a lot of people, especially in the white male side of America, that are afraid to give up the status they've had in this country for over 200 years. And not saying at all it's right as a white male, but what I'm saying is I think there is that feeling that rather than understanding the reason they're not getting ahead is because CEOs are making now hundreds of times what the lowest paid employee does. The fact that it's harder to unionize and have a voice in your jobs so that you can get your wage to increase. The fact that the rich are getting 83% of the tax break that was passed, that's going to cost this country $1.9 trillion. Instead of blaming where they should blame, they have been misdirected by people like Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and their ilk to protect that message, to protect that wealthiest class, and instead to be able to point the finger somewhere else that we clearly know is not the reason for their woes or their lack of for potential future status. So I really do believe that's the issue that we're facing. But again, people will, I think, as we move forward and show that they're not going to lose what they think they're going to lose, we're going to be much better. And I think we're going to look back at Donald Trump as not only the worst president in history, but hopefully the first president to get indicted.
Yeah. I would add there's a good chunk of the white American electorate that's just plain old flat out racist, and we have to acknowledge that.
And there's probably, I would say, I mean, I'm guessing, Tom, maybe about half of the support he has, unfortunately, may fall in that category. But the status question, I've come to really believe is a big factor.
Yeah, I think so, too. I think it's both. Thank you. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. We'll be back right after this break.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Congressman Pocan is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. He represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. Pocan at house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
It's the Mueller Report. We're reading from page 131. This is under the title of Paul Manafort's Ties to... It's the Mueller Report. We're on page 137. This is the part where they're talking about Paul Manafort's association with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska being the Ukrainian-Russian oligarch who is building the steel and aluminum factory in Kentucky to help Mitch McConnell get reelected in 2020. Manafort has alleged to the office, that's the Mueller office, that he was willing to brief Deripaska, this is the guy who's helping out Mitch McConnell, only on public campaign matters, and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Page 138. Paul Manafort's 2 campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States is the subtitle here. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August of 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to that meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016. While in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the afternoon of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. The opposition bloc is the political entity in eastern Ukraine that's aligned with Russia. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with the subject line "Black Caviar," Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle, I'm prepared to do it. It has to do with the future of his country and is quite interesting." End quote. Page 139. Manafort identified, quote, "the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar" as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych, by the way, is the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine that Paul Manafort helped get elected. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. The rest of that sentence has been blocked out by Bill Barr. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29 email, "Tuesday, August 2nd is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City." 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back from Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Excuse me. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their version of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That would be the part of Ukraine that's mostly Russian-speaking. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the Mueller office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Welcome back. It's anything goes. It is Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. And Stephen in Albuquerque, New Mexico. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes, thank you guys for what you do. My question is how long is Congress going to continue financing this lavish lifestyle of the Trump family? They're not king, queen, and princes. These people are living on our dime, and I'm tired of seeing Ivanka and Jared getting away with everything they get away with and going on all the trips. And every time Trump goes somewhere in another country, they got to be there with him. And I don't remember any other politician in my lifetime that's ever gotten away with all of this.
Yeah, Stephen, I'll tell you, watching Ivanka at the summit last weekend was embarrassing. I try to have conversations with world leaders, thinking she's the shadow Secretary of State or something. I think of the expense that's going into Mar-a-Lago and how often the president's golfing, and that money, if that just went to soap and toothbrushes for kids, although, again, in many of these facilities are already paying people over $700 a day to house a kid, so that wouldn't probably even solve that problem. But there's no question that watching that kind of money, going into what the president's really abusing for his family is frustrating, but also I don't know if there's a direct way. We're trying to get at his taxes. We're trying to get at other aspects to be able to stop this president, but Mitch McConnell is completely unwilling to do anything that we send over from the House, and I'm told this by at least a half a dozen now U.S. senators. All they do is approve conservative judges and do virtually nothing else. And Mitch McConnell lets every bill we send over there go to die. So we just have to be ready to get rid of him in 2020. Hopefully other people who are at least independent-minded might see that and decide we need some changes because of it. But it does sure seem to be abuse, especially I don't see the purpose that his family serves, especially when they're overseas.
Sharon in Bellevue, Washington. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Sharon?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was sitting there just waiting and listening to the program.
There you go. You're on the air.
Well, hello. Thank you for taking my call. With this administration, it's like whack-a-mole. I mean, I could probably protest 24/7. But I have to work, and just like the rest of the country, it's just been frustrating. But my question for you today is on the health care legislation, the lawsuit that's taking place. And one thing, when I was watching the Democratic debate, it's like I know Medicare for all, and I'm an agent, and frankly, I work with this on a day-to-day basis, and I think what I'm frustrated about is that the Affordable Care Act was quite a wonderful piece of legislation, and it has been undermined by this administration and the Republicans. Actually, to be honest with you, it's the Republicans. I cannot believe that Donald Trump knew what he was doing. He just, from day one, just when he first took office, that's when that legislation starting to undermine the program took place. And so I have to believe that started way before he took in, because he doesn't have the knowledge.
The Koch brothers have been funding this forever.
Together.
Sharon, what's your question for Congressman Pocan?
So what are we doing to stop this getting away with pre-existing conditions?
And you might want to toss in the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals there, Congressman.
Sure.
We now know that you've got two hardcore right-wing judges out of the three-judge panel who are going to be deciding whether to strike down the entire Affordable Care Act.
Right. And Sharon, first of all, I think your whack-a-mole example is exactly how I feel every day as well, because there's so many fronts we're fighting this administration on. Specifically to health care, I mean, I think we all agree the Affordable Care Act did many very, very important things. The most important being, if you need health care insurance and you have a pre-existing condition, you can get it. Prior to that, it was profit insurance. Then it became health insurance. The fact that children stay onto their parents' policy until they're 26, women paying the same as men, taking care of preventive care so you don't have other expenses. And we did have 22 million people get access under it. The problem is the death by 1,000 cuts from the Republicans in this administration. But the Republicans, we watched what they've done as well in Congress, has made it that it's starting to not be so much of the Affordable Care Act. When your deductibles are $5,000 for someone making $35,000, that's unaffordable. And that's what we're starting to see, is that it's becoming a real problem because of that death by 1,000 cuts. So we've got measures that would improve it and fix it and restore it, but we're not going to get that through Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump. And if the courts would come and get rid of it completely, we're really going to be in a tough situation. And we've seen states do so-called pre-existing condition protection bills that really are watered down and don't do that. The good news is the public now accepts that health insurance should cover you if you're sick. So I think we have won on that issue, and I think we'll be able to fight hard should the courts do something on that, and I think that'll get appealed, whatever decision happens there. But all the more reason why I think people are just frustrated and why things like Medicare for All become the issue that people really cling on to, because, look, Canada is not a third world country. Most of Europe is not destitute. It works. We're the only major industrialized country that doesn't have a universal health care policy, and we need to have that, and I think people have come around to it. So we're going to have to see what happens with that court decision, but, $5,000 deductibles aren't working right now, and people are really starting to feel that as well. And this is all the more reason why 2020 is going to be imperative on what happens in healthcare.
David in Los Angeles, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello?
Hey, David, you're on the air.
Hey, I'm sorry. Hey, so I just want to know why the FBI hasn't gotten involved with these border facilities. I mean, back in the 60s, they went in the South, but it just seems like this is an ideal situation for them to go in and, do their stuff. All right, that's it. Thanks.
Yeah,
thanks, David.
David, you make a really good point. Unfortunately, the people who right now are in charge of the Department of Justice aren't exactly friendly to doing the right thing.
That would be Bill Barr, right?
Right, yeah, they're doing whatever the administration wants. We've just watched what he did with the Mueller report, outright lying about what's in the report. I can't expect you will have good people who are in the FBI, but they have to be directed to do it from the very top. And if the very top is rotten to the core because they've accepted that in order to work for this administration, we can't get that done. So it's extremely unfortunate. And you would hope, this situation with the children at the border, not only is it reprehensible by every value and moral I think that we have as Americans, but think about what it looks like internationally. Think about what it's doing to the kids. Think about all the other aspects of this, just so Donald Trump can try to prove to his base that he's fighting for the wall. It really shows who Donald Trump is, and I just hope that people remember that next November. We have to make sure that even our friends who may be a little more moderate or conservative realize, are you really served well by having him be the face of the United States of America?
Yeah, there you go. Valerie in San Diego. Whoop, hang on just a second there. There you go. Valerie in San Diego. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Phew, I thought you lost me for a second. Yeah, my question is, isn't what the for-profit prisons and ICE doing complicit and illegal in aiding and abetting kidnapping and child abuse? And in fact, they're actually doing the child abuse. And can't they be arrested? And can't we at least threaten them with prison so that they stop doing what they're doing, or, in the future hold them accountable for this?
Well, Valerie, that's the very debate we're having right now is what do you refer to the conditions right now? And we're now seeing some video. Luckily, some is getting leaked out. And you're hearing the descriptions now by members of Congress and I think even more importantly, the Inspector General, completely neutral entity, talk about what's there. I think, in my opinion, that is child abuse. Now, whether you take it to the next steps of arresting people for child abuse, or what we tried to do last week is the House Democrats had in our version of the emergency supplemental provisions that took the Flores Agreement and made it work for all facilities. You had to have certain standards in these facilities, and if a contractor didn't have them, they could lose their contract. And unfortunately, the Mitch McConnell wouldn't compromise. He sent back the Senate version. Unfortunately, some people on my side were okay with taking the Senate version over the House version, and then here we are this week looking at these deplorable conditions, and we would have addressed that by having children kept shorter time periods in those facilities, having better standards, and having a real hammer over the contractors. So in my opinion, and I think your opinion, it's child abuse, but we really have to fix the situation, and I think public pressure right now may be the best thing we can do to fix the situation.
Norma in Montgomery, Alabama. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, that's Congressman Pocan. I just got a call that Trump may decide to keep his tanks and have them deployed as tourist attractions. Does Congress have the legal authority to force him to return them to their stations?
Yeah, I got to tell you, Norm, I honestly don't know the answer. I have not seen that. I've been following his Twitter account today the best I could. I've not seen that. I don't know. I mean, that kind of equipment is really, really expensive just to have laying around for people to look at. I mean, the idea is that you have that because you may need it and you want to be able to use it. But I just don't have a direct answer for you on your very fair question.
It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. Congressman Mark Pocan, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. One of the two big cheese progressives in the entire Congress. On for an hour taking your calls in our Middays with Mark program. He also represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin in the U.S. House of Representatives. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative, Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. And tell your friends about Middays with Mark. And welcome back. Jeff in is it Lapwai, Idaho? I'm not sure how.
Lapaway.
Lapaway. Okay, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi, gentlemen. I watch you guys all the time. What I want to know is, it seems like most of our problems that we're having is with our certain few leaders.
It's the Mueller report. We're on
Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer. What can we do to change this leadership? I know we can primary them, but to get them out of the leadership, such as the House.
Yeah, Jeff, I guess I would maybe define the problem slightly different. And Mitch McConnell clearly is taking every bill that we're sending out of the House that, quite honestly, Nancy Pelosi is sending out of the House. So I think she's doing the right thing. And then they're going over to Mitch McConnell where they seem to die. And we're trying to figure out how to create more public awareness and put pressure on the senators to put pressure on Mitch McConnell. In the case of what happened last week where some of us weren't real happy with the bill that left the House, Nancy Pelosi fought for the negotiations that the Progressive Caucus had put in the bill that we voted on as Democrats in the House as our position on a bill. So I have no complaint with, I think, the things that she's tried to do. She has worked with us on H.R. 1, on the DREAM Act, on other bills. So I think the problem really is Mitch McConnell and the Senate and the leadership there and the White House. So when I look at 2020, I think that's the message we have to send. We need someone new at the White House. We need to try to take back the Senate so you can have a different leader in place. And I'm sure there'll be times I may disagree with Nancy Pelosi, but I generally don't. I mean, generally, she has been someone I can negotiate with honestly, and she'll fight for what we've then made agreements on. And, I just want to make sure we don't put a brush across all leadership because I think all leaders act a little differently in this case.
Don in Winsboro, South Carolina. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, hi, Tom. Hi, Congressman Pocan. Thanks for what you both do. I wanted to thank you guys again. A few months back, I talked to both of you on the program, and the Armed Forces Military Retirement Home in D.C. and Gulfport, Mississippi, were going to increase their fee from 45% to 60%. And I don't know if the staff or whatever helped, but you guys might have helped. And they lowered it to raising it to 46%. So thanks for your help on that.
Yeah, well, Don, hey, thank you and thank listeners like yourself who care enough to contact your representatives. I don't think I had any kind of direct involvement in making it happen, but I think having a lot of people reach out to their elected representatives meant a bunch of us called up and they accepted the pushback that we gave and changed it. So, I think you're a classic definition of what happens when you're participatory in your democracy. You have to be willing to speak out, call your elected representatives, thank them when they do something right, and honestly criticize them when they don't, but make sure you're heard and still do it in a respectful way so that you can be heard. But it's your activism and others' activism like yourself is likely why the change occurred.
Yeah, and this is why I end this program every day with democracy is not a spectator sport.
Absolutely.
Something I borrowed from Bernie years ago. that we have to get out there and get active. Tag, you're it. This has been how we wrap the show since we started. Actually,
we have the people and we have the values. Generally, they have the money.
Yeah, there you go. And, hopefully organized people will out-organized money eventually.
Exactly.
There you go. Congressman Mark Pocan with us, taking your calls for the hour on Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be back in about 10 seconds here with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. Stick around. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Steve in St. Louis, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hey, Tom. Hey, Congressman. I've got a question. Has there ever been a president of the United States in our history forego any debates and just run on what he says at his rallies, or in modern day times on his commercials and ads as well? Because I think this president might do that.
You mean ignore Bill Weld? Basically.
No, ignore any of the
ignore the Democratic primary or debates.
Ignore it and say that they're going to try to entrap me. So I'm just going on what my base is. I've told them at my rallies and on my commercials, and go with that.
Got it.
Yeah, Steve, a good question. I can't think in my 54 years on the planet of a candidate doing that. However, you're right. I could see this president. I mean, he operates totally differently than any other norm we've had out there. The only thing I will say is that Donald Trump is a reality show star first, and reality show stars live for the camera and live for what he gets off of the support from people who watch him on camera. And I think because of that, it may be a little bit hard for him and his nature to do that. But you're right. We should be ready for anything with this guy.
Renee in St. Louis, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Renee?
Hi.
Hi, you're on the air.
You're on the air. Hi, Tom. How are you?
Good.
Congressman Pocan, how are you today?
Very good, Renee.
Thank you both. Okay, now, my question, number one, is in reference to the parade. What is he using an executive order to make this parade happen? Is that allowed?
In other words, how is this authorized and the payment for it and all that kind of thing?
Right. How was it authorized? Because remember, a few months ago, we had this conversation about him wanting to have this parade. Now it is materializing, and we're getting it whether we want it or not. So what did he use in reference to an executive order or procedures to get the parade authorized? Then I'm going to just make a quick statement because I only get one question. My next issue was on health care. I want them to include dental and vision. On the jury rigging, the Electoral College needs to be investigated because that is redlining and we're moving backwards. And then my last thing was Steve Mnuchin. If you remember a few months ago or last year sometime, why did he have a skiff in his office?
Okay, Renee.
Yeah.
In the future, please keep it to one thing. But thank you. You're on,
I'll get a couple of them. I'll do my best.
Okay.
So, as far as the funding on the parade, I think again, I just saw this in the last 24 hours that they're going to try to redirect funds to the National Park Service, and so I can't tell you. It's nothing.
Which is who runs the National Mall and all those monuments, by the way.
Right. And I don't. Nothing came through Congress to authorize that expense or that transfer. So I don't know exactly, but I know he can, with executive privilege in some cases, or not, maybe that's not the right word, privilege, but executive powers, move some funds. And so we will know more, trust me on this, Renee, next week, because I think a lot of this is just evolving a week that we're not in Washington. I completely agree with you on vision and dental. That's why the Medicare for All bill does include that and makes it available for everyone through Medicare, because those affect your health as much as anything else. And I'm now forgetting the last two aspects of your issues, Renee, but hopefully I can answer those two.
That's fine. We ask people just to have one, so that's fine. John in Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yeah, Tom, thank you. Mark, my question is, a while back I heard that when Trump deals with North Korea, he could be held for treason. Is that a possible situation? And can Barr go to prison for lying to Congress?
Yes, on the first one, no, I don't think there's any chance because he's doing things fairly in the open, and we may disagree with it, but I don't know if it's to a treasonous level. So I would just say a flat no on that one. Second one, I mean, Bill Barr, I mean, it's going to depend what comes out of if we find out that he intentionally lied or did something illegal. Yeah, absolutely, I think he could go to prison. Part of why we're trying to have more of the Mueller report get out there, more people come before us to answer questions, to know why did he say that report was that way. I mean, I think it's going to be very interesting to hear Robert Mueller express the conversations he had with him if he's willing to, and that's a big if. But hopefully others will, and that's what we're going to try to find out.
Right, and please, callers, please limit yourself to one question. It's not fair to the other people who are waiting in line to ask a question to tie up Congressman Pocan like this. Tim in West Seattle, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning. Congressman Pocan, besides interviewing Robert Mueller, do you intend to interview any of his staffers that work for him? That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim, great, concise. I don't know offhand, although I'm guessing it will, especially if some of that comes out of some of his answers, if more information comes out. I think there's a lot more people they'd like to bring because you need to get the richness out of it. I mean, if Mr. Mueller is going to have a limited amount to testify, there may very likely be more questions. But at this point, the committee's only indicated, to the best of my knowledge, Mr. Mueller.
Colleen in Long Island, New York. We have just a minute to the end of the hour, more or less.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I had a conversation the other day with a man who seemed like a very nice guy. And when we were discussing what's going on in Washington, he was like, it's all a game, it's all a joke, don't worry about it. And I finally said, after a lot of quibs and glib remarks from him, why don't we just disband Congress, dissolve the Supreme Court, and let Trump run things the way he wants to? And that's when he backed off and he said, oh, no, that's going too far. But my question is, how do we get the message of the Democratic Progressive Party out to the public, to somebody like this man, who seems like he's not a bad guy?
Okay.
Yeah, and I think that's part of using the news media, quite honestly, as well as Donald Trump has. Having witnesses come and talk about what's in the Mueller report will be far more effective than expecting people to read the Mueller report. And I think using social media and all of us sharing the articles that talk about Mitch McConnell killing every bill that we send over. When you talk about what's in those bills, we know that public support for most of them is 60 to 80%. So I think it's somewhat incumbent on us, since we don't have the corporate media working necessarily with us. And, let's make sure we have conversations just like you did, because, I think most people really are of goodwill. Some are going to be a little tougher, but those one-on-one conversations are invaluable.
Congressman Pocan, thanks so much for being with us today.
Happy 4th of July to everybody, too. Thank you so much, Tom.
Thank you, Congressman, and back at you. Happy 4th to you, too. You're a true American patriot. We really appreciate your being here.
Thank you, Tom. You, too. Appreciate it.
We'll be back. We're going to be talking, let's see, in our second. Oh, Jamal Abdi is going to be with us. So we're going to talk Iran right after this.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From United Nations headquarters.
We say fight back!
It's the Mueller report. We're on page 137. This is the part where they're talking about Paul Manafort's association with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska being the Ukrainian-Russian oligarch who is building the steel and aluminum factory in Kentucky to help Mitch McConnell get reelected in 2020. Manafort has alleged to the office, that's the Mueller office, that he was willing to brief Deripaska, this is the guy who's helping out Mitch McConnell, only on public campaign matters, and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Page 138. Paul Manafort's 2 campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States is the subtitle here. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August of 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to that meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016, while in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the afternoon of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. The opposition bloc is the political entity in eastern Ukraine that's aligned with Russia. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with the subject line "Black Caviar," Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle, I'm prepared to do it. It has to do with the future of his country and is quite interesting." End quote. Page 139. Manafort identified, quote, "the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar" as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych, by the way, is the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine that Paul Manafort helped get elected. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. The rest of that sentence has been blocked out by Bill Barr. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29 email, "Tuesday, August 2nd is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City." 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back to Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Excuse me. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their version of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That would be the part of Ukraine that's mostly Russian-speaking. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the Mueller office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy. It's the Mueller report. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
'96 Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Our program is brought to you by 8 Sleep, EIGHT Sleep. The pod is the first bed designed to boost performance, your performance. More at 8sleep.com/Tom, T-H-O-M. And on the line with us is our old buddy Jamal Abdi. He is the president of the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, NIAC.org. And you can tweet him at NIA Council or JAbdi, A-B-D-I. Jamal, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me back.
I think in the period of time from the last time we talked until now, Iran has broken through the limit on that was part of the agreement that they had with us and France, Germany, UK, China, and Russia. This takes them nowhere close to sufficiently enriched uranium to build a bomb. I think that's in the 90% category. But it is, and they're floating around 20, 30%. I'm not sure exactly where the enrichment is, but or maybe it's even far lower than that. If you know, please fill us in. But do you see this as a negotiating strategy? Is this a way of trying to get Europe back on board? Is this I mean, what is the logic here? What is going on?
Yeah. So first, what Iran is doing. So Iran has surpassed the limit on the amount of this low enriched uranium that it has stockpiled.
Oh, I see.
And
okay.
Yeah. So this is probably in terms of the range of escalatory steps that Iran can take to exceed some of the limits and restrictions under the nuclear deal. This is near the bottom of the list. Although if Iran does start to amass, an enormous stockpile, that would give them more options to, potentially enrich that to a higher level and have enough for a nuclear weapon, if they decide to go in that direction. But I think what Iran is doing is really trying to take a very measured escalatory approach to provide many different sort of checkpoints for off-ramps from this cycle of escalation. And what they've threatened to do next, what the President Rouhani said that Iran was going to begin doing this Sunday is to actually begin enriching at a purer level, so a higher level of enrichment. Currently, they're at 3.5%, which is the level that you would want for most civilian purposes. In the past, Iran has enriched all the way up to 20%. This is pre-nuclear deal, and that was by Iran's telling, that was for the Tehran research reactor. It's for medical isotopes and things of that nature, but it does get you closer to the 90% purity level, which is weapons grade. And so that's the next step that is potentially coming. Now, Iran's strategy here, for the first half of the Trump administration, Iran really kind of sat on its hands, at least as far as the nuclear deal is concerned. Iran was never getting the sanctions relief that was promised. There were all kinds of issues with that. And when Trump took office, most private businesses and banks said, okay, this deal is probably too risky for us to really take advantage of the sanctions relief. And so then when Trump killed the deal, it got even worse. And so Iran's economy has been suffering. They are not getting the relief that was promised. It has punished all the politicians inside of Iran who argued for this deal. And what Iran did was they practiced this policy of strategic patience. And the idea was, we're going to stay with the deal. We're not going to upset Europe and the other parties to the deal. We're going to make it very clear that the United States now is the rogue state that's not acting as a normal country, and we're going to go on with our commitments. At some point in the last month or so, clearly Iran has decided to pivot and has realized that, at least what they say is they need to meet pressure with pressure. They cannot sit on their hands and allow really the Trump administration to get all the benefits of the nuclear deal and put Iran's nuclear program in this box, while continuing to sanction Iran and not actually give what was promised. So they have pivoted to this pressure for pressure policy, and I think you see that with at least the threats of a more aggressive military posture and potentially the shooting down of the drone a couple of weeks ago. So there are escalatory threats there, and then on the nuclear deal itself, there are these escalations, and this is, I think, the first. And again, I think what does Iran really want out of this? Well, many think that it is to put pressure on Europe to do more, to step up and actually challenge the United States and actually, kind of put their money where their mouth is to protect European companies from sanctions, to allow this trade and investment to go forward. I'm not quite so sure. I think that Iran realizes that if the United States is not at least bought in, it's going to be very difficult for the Iranian economy to recover. And so I think that bigger picture, Iran is probably willing to negotiate with the United States even under Trump, but they want the United States to essentially suspend their pressure campaign and provide some breathing room so that the talks can go on. And
they need some respect. China announced, I believe, I've only seen one story on this morning, but China has announced in the last couple of days that they're rolling out their version of an alternative to the SWIFT system, which is the settlement system where companies and countries, as money is flowing across borders, there's basically this kind of central clearinghouse, and it's mostly done in dollars, which is one of the reasons the dollar is the reserve currency of the world, in addition to oil. And please correct me if I'm getting any of this wrong, because I'm no expert on this stuff. And the EU apparently is putting together some, variation on, a way to have international settlements of funds that don't involve dollars. Conceivably, could any of that be a way for European countries in particular? And I'm guessing Iran has business with China. I don't know if that's been affected or not. But getting around the American sanctions, where Trump is basically threatening European countries that do business in the United States or with U.S. companies, that they're going to get cut off if they do business with Iran, and the weapon he's been using is the fact that everything's denominated in dollars. Or is that just way out there or way down the road?
I think that's potentially something that could work in the near term, but is probably a longer-term approach. The Europeans promised this mechanism where trade could actually occur, where Iran would be able to sell its oil and have basically a way to avoid touching the U.S. financial system, and I think Europe has been unwilling to really test that proposition. They finally got this channel online, but for now it is only allowing trade in goods that are not sanctioned by the United States. So Europe has still really not kind of taken big risks here, but they have started, and it's baby steps. And I think what the Iranians have seen is that by escalating, they've actually gotten Europe to be a little bit more bold with those steps. But I think the bigger picture here, it's almost ironic, if you kind of take a literal reading of what the Islamic Revolution was about and what Khomeini was saying, what Khamenei says today about this, this contest with the United States to kind of take on the imperial power and to break the hegemony of the United States. And ironically, the sanctions policies that the U.S. has adopted are really actually doing that for Iran, in that the U.S. has had this monopoly over the financial system because it's viewed as this kind of benevolent dictator as far as the world financial system is concerned. Now you have the U.S. kind of abusing that power and saying, okay, if you want to be a part of the financial system, you have to abide by all these rules, even if we signed on to an agreement and now we're backing out, but you have to abide by the sanctions. And so the response that the Chinese are taking and what the Europeans are considering is, okay, how do we maintain our sovereignty to be able to set our own policies if the United States has the last word? And so they're beginning to devise ways to eliminate the U.S. monopoly and end American hegemony over the financial system and its ability to impose these sanctions. So I think longer term, this is, the Trump administration is expending so much capital and really not getting anything for it. And it's this, it's this race to, okay, is Iran's economy going to collapse first, or are the Americans going to relent, or is Europe going to be able to find a way out of this? And if something doesn't happen, I think ultimately you will have this military conflict, or you will have the U.S. just saying, okay, Iran has broken out of the deal, we no longer have inspectors there, but there's nothing we can do about it.
Yeah, and interestingly, this takes place against the backdrop of, 20 years ago, the United States really was the only major economy in the world. Now China, is within a year, and some would say it's already passed in surpassing the size of the U.S. GDP, and the European Union is a serious competitor as well. So and it looks like Trump is he's shooting our country in the foot by doing this. It's crazy.
Really accelerating it.
Yeah, it really is. Jamal Abdi, the president of the National Iranian American Council, NIAC, the website niac.org. You can tweet him at jabdi or at NIA Council. Jamal, thanks so much for dropping by.
Great talking, Tom.
Great talking with you as always. It's always informative, and I really appreciate your coming on. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls and my thoughts on all of the above right after this. Stick around. And welcome back. Lawrence in Marina, California. Hey, Lawrence, thanks for watching Free Speech TV. What's on your mind today?
Thank you. You got me.
Yeah.
Well, in general, what I wanted to talk about, and I was hoping to be able to get on while Congressman Mark Pocan was on,
but you're stuck with me.
Okay. The problem that we're having in terms of every bill dying coming out of the House going into the Senate is it's the distribution of senators per state.
Yep.
In general, I mean, I was looking at population demographics and statistics that is provided by the U.S. Census Bureau, and they were seeing there are states such as Montana with 500,000 people, while I'm in California with 37 million.
Right.
And yet they have the same power that we have with two senators.
We both have two senators. Yeah.
Yeah.
If I could toss some background in here, Abraham Lincoln was the first president to try to rig the Senate to benefit his own political party. Back in 1864, I think it was, or maybe early 1865, before he was assassinated, the threshold to have a member of the House of Representatives for a state to have somebody representing them was, at that time, 124,000 people, citizens in a state. The Nevada territory only had 7,000 people, so there's no way it qualified to become a state. And yet, those 7,000 people were all Republicans. They were abolitionists, they were anti-slavery. So Lincoln made Nevada a state and got 2 senators, and that helped him give solid, as they were bringing the Confederate states back into the United States, guarantee solid control by the Republicans. And then about 10 years later, I don't recall the exact year, but it was Ulysses S. Grant. Once again, the southern states at that point were fully reintegrated back into the United States, and he was concerned that the southern states and their friends were the Democratic states. This was the Republican Party. He was Republican president. The only Democratic president after the Civil War was Grover Cleveland. But in any case, Ulysses S. Grant, again, the Dakota Territory, which was one area, had a total population of 26,000 people. And again, at that point in time, it was around 140,000 people to have a member of the House of Representatives, in other words, to be a state. And not only did he bring the Dakota Territory in, but he split it in 2, rather arbitrarily, made North Dakota and South Dakota in order to get 4 Republican senators. And that was in the 1880s, as I recall, or maybe the late 1870s. So we've got these, examples of 6 senators being added by Republican presidents. And, at the time, these are Republican presidents who were opposed to slavery and were, trying to move the country forward, to fight back against the pressure of the South. But now the Democrats are saying, hey, Puerto Rico should have 2 senators. Washington, D.C. should have 2 senators. That would balance out the Senate at the very least. And then I think if any of the states really wanted to do something, California could split into 2 or 3 states and create a multi-state compact so they could continue to operate in a way as California, but have 6 senators. New York City and New York State, if they were to split apart, it could be 2 states. Florida and Texas could be both broken into a couple of states. And Lawrence, I'm sorry, I didn't realize I was running out of time. You want to add something to that?
You answered it. No, that's fine. I just want the public to be more aware of that, because that's the reason why you have large percentages of the population against these gun control laws and all these other things.
Oh, yeah, everything else. This is why Mitch McConnell can say, I'm the Grim Reaper. Spot on, Lawrence. Thank you very much for the call. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And some fascinating stuff. Andy Borowitz is so good. This is obviously it's satire over at the New Yorker. Calling it incredibly exciting news, President Donald Trump revealed on Wednesday that his long-planned 4th of July parade in Washington will include a flyover by Russian Su-24 fighter planes. These are beautiful, gleaming Russian planes, Trump boasted to Tucker Carlson of Fox News. I'm the first American president who's had Russian planes flying over Washington. Yeah. And another little note I wanted to share with you. I don't know if Pete Buttigieg's people were listening to my show yesterday, but he has now rolled out, in fact, he tweeted it out today, a program. He's called it a new call to service. Now, he's not calling for essentially a draft like I was, where you can either choose the military or serve your country. But he wants to raise AmeriCorps from 75,000 to 250,000 people. Also, he wants to build new organizations, the Climate Corps, the Community Health Corps, and the Intergenerational Service Corps, all ways that Americans, particularly unemployed Americans, particularly Americans stuck in poverty, can serve their country and essentially have a job. So here's Pete Buttigieg moving in kind of an FDR direction, which I think is, really cool. I did want to talk about, there's just so much going on here. Fox News has just gone berserk with Colin Kaepernick and Nike. And Colin Kaepernick had warned Nike of this before they rolled out their Betsy Ross shoe, which, there's, and now that Nike has pulled them, they're selling for thousands of dollars a piece on some of the secondary websites. And but here's the story. Kaepernick said to Nike, I'm your spokesperson, and I'm just telling you guys, if you roll out a shoe with a flag on it that's pre-Civil War, basically, that is during the slavery era in the United States, the right-wingers are going to latch onto this and use this as their symbol, and that shoe is going to become their shoe. And by having me as your spokesman, you've kind of, said you're not going to go down that road. Well, Nike did it anyway, and then the blowback came, and so they pulled the shoes, and now Ted Cruz, Marsha Blackburn, Josh Hawley, all Republicans are now tweeting, well, for example, Ted Cruz, it's a good thing Nike only wants to sell sneakers to people who hate the American flag, right? I mean, this is, of course, this is the kind of Republican crapola that you get. But what this led to was this fascinating survey where they asked Americans about their, sense of patriotism. This is a Gallup poll. Fewer than 50% of Americans are extremely proud of their country. Fewer than 50%. This is the second straight year, by the way, of sub 50% readings. 22% of Democrats are extremely proud, down 10 points in a single year. Republicans have remained extremely proud of their country, 76%, but that's 10 points below 2003. Dr. Wilfred McClay says, and this is the guy that Fox News is quoting, he says, patriotism is in decline because politicians like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and others have seized on isolated historical events, politicized them, and used them to divide Americans. At the same time, socialist textbooks and educators have deprived young Americans of a common sense and hopeful view of American history and the American project. Right. So then Fox News tweets this out. They tweet out this poll, and they say, the Fox and Friends program tweeted out the results of the poll. Oh, wait a minute. Here it is. This is the actual quote from Fox and Friends first. A new poll shows only 45% of American women in the U.S. are extremely proud to be American. This is the lowest amount ever recorded by this poll. What do you think is causing this decline? Fox asked this question. And it's hysterical, the responses. Linda Liu responds, this is all on Twitter, the liar in chief. Sweater Weather Underground responds, concentration camps. Realtor Sullivan replies on Twitter, really? You seriously don't know the answer, Fox? Why Americans are not proud of their country? Well, there's no hope for you. Bless your heart. Somebody from the South, I think. Here, Abby Rivera Aponte tweets, I believe in a democracy. I'm a patriot. But, and yes, that's a but, I will hang my flag on high the day the narcissistic rapist con man is out of office. Thanks for asking, Fox. Regina Stay Positive for Dems tweets back, are you kidding? Are you proud of children in cages? People not being able to afford drugs? Our closest allies being dissed while tyrants are fawned over? The ultra-rich are pitting the poor and middle class against each other, and it's working? Protect the Truth tweets back at Fox News, probably the traitorous president who appears to be compromised by foreigners the way the founders feared. P.S. Thanks, Rupert Murdoch. And WGO responds to Fox News' question, why are Americans not proud to be Americans anymore? I'd theorize it has something to do with a sociopathic, malignant, sexual predator narcissist running the White House and the world, spreading hate, racism, xenophobia, and greed while enriching himself and others. Another one says, I'm going to blame Obama's tan suit. But, essentially the question, is it appropriate for American businesses to use pre-Civil War icons and symbols to sell products, which is what Nike tried to do. And, and they're getting their ass kicked for it, or their butt kicked, for it in some ways. And certainly they just handed this to Fox News and the snowflakes on the right who are aggrieved by anything that they think aggrieves them.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
I guarantee you this is a major topic on all the snowflake shows over on the hard right. Hannity and Limbaugh and all these guys. What are your thoughts on it? It's the Mueller report. We're on page 137. This is the part where they're talking about Paul Manafort's association with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska being the Ukrainian-Russian oligarch who is building the steel and aluminum factory in Kentucky to help Mitch McConnell get reelected in 2020. Manafort has alleged to the office, that's the Mueller office, that he was willing to brief Deripaska, this is the guy who's helping out Mitch McConnell, only only on public campaign matters, and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Page 138. Paul Manafort's 2 campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States is the subtitle here. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August of 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to that meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016. While in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the afternoon of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. The opposition bloc is the political entity in eastern Ukraine that's aligned with Russia. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with the subject line "Black Caviar," Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle, I'm prepared to do it. It has to do with the future of his country and is quite interesting." End quote. Page 139. Manafort identified, quote, "the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar" as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych, by the way, is the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine that Paul Manafort helped get elected. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. The rest of that sentence has been blocked out by Bill Barr. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29 email, "Tuesday, August 2nd is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City." 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back to Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Excuse me. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their version of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That would be the part of Ukraine that's mostly Russian-speaking. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the Mueller office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You know, every day here on Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. So, some questions on the table here. Is it appropriate for American businesses to use pre-Civil War icons, symbols to sell products? And, or is the blowback appropriate? Or is it overreaction, number one? Iran, we had this fascinating conversation with Jamal Abdi. I don't know if you want to weigh in on that. I think it was, fairly self-explanatory. It's important stuff that we all need to know. Our entire first hour was Congressman Mark Pocan answering your questions on a whole variety of things. He's the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, and he comes on every Wednesday on our first hour and takes your calls for the hour. And a lot of fascinating topics got brought up there that we can, go into a little more deeply. I also want to make a note that, while most of America is basically shocked and horrified by the stories and the pictures that are coming out of Trump's concentration camps, there is a small part of America, and I shouldn't say too small, it looks like maybe even a third of America is actually delighted, which is why the Trump administration allowed this Inspector General's report to go out publicly. I mean, they could have suppressed it just like they suppressed stuff coming out of the EPA and whatnot. Trump's base, though, thinks it's just fine that he's brutal and cruel. And, when you ask these guys any questions about the southern border, their answer is, well, if people don't want to be stuck in those conditions, they shouldn't come to the United States, which is how, that argument is exactly how Trump and the media divert our attention from why these people are coming. Again, they're not coming looking for a job. That population, that was 15 years ago. People who came here looking for jobs, mostly from Mexico, they're going back to Mexico and have been for a decade. These are people who are fleeing a 5-year climate change-driven drought, and who is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases, and cumulatively is the world's largest emitter of greenhouse gases? Us, the United States, number one. And number two, which is wiping out millions of family farms. And number two, Ronald Reagan started this American political meddling in Central America, and sow the wind, reap the whirlwind. This is the whirlwind coming back to us. And until the countries of the Americas, particularly the United States, we have to be in a leadership role on this, address these issues of the disaster, the climate change disaster that's happening in Central America right now, and the political and economic, the economic disaster that comes out of the climate change disaster, and the political disaster that comes out of, the years of Reagan and Republican presidents since him messing with basically governments in Central America. Until we deal with this, we're going to, much like Europe, accepting large numbers of refugees from Northern Africa, and that activating a right-wing, racist, freaked-out white people base in Europe that has now, given these right-wing parties, they're raised to the point where they're major players now in Germany, in France, in Poland, in Hungary. Poland and Hungary have been functionally taken over by these parties. Italy now, Greece. We're going to see more and more of this in the United States. So that, as long as the media and the narrative is all about Trump and, quote, migrants, this is actually going to continue to activate Trump's base. It's going to activate his racist base. And as Congressman Pocan pointed out, it's also going to activate, white middle class or working class people who have seen over the last 20, 30 years their wages steadily decline and haven't made the connection, because the media never talks about it, that the reason their wages are going down is because their unions are being decimated as a consequence of Reaganism, and because their jobs are being shipped overseas as a result of neoliberal trade policies. And instead, they're blaming, they used to, Reagan, they blamed the white workers blamed black people for wanting their jobs. Now they're blaming Hispanic people. It's like, it's this whole snowflake culture that's promoted by the hard right, and I shouldn't even call them the hard right because they like being called hard, by the fascist right, or by the pathetic snowflake right. But Democrats need to, every time we talk about the crisis on the border and the horrible conditions, we need to point out that these people are not migrants, they're refugees, and that they are fleeing political violence that we helped create, and that they are fleeing climate change that is destroying their ecosystems and ruining family farms and throwing people into poverty that we helped create, in addition to the horror and the brutality. So, I think that these are all things that we need to be talking about. So anyhow, to your phone calls. Liz in Mesa, Arizona. Hey, Liz, what's on your mind today?
Hello?
Hey, Liz, you're on the air.
Hi. I want to talk about the
Liz, you need to put your mouth right up against the microphone of your phone. It sounds like you're talking to me from the bottom of, from...
Better?
Yeah, thank you. Otherwise, it sounds like you're in the bathroom. What's up?
I want to talk about the Brown versus Brown, the forced busing.
Mm-hmm.
I was in Colorado when that started. I'm now living in Arizona. The people in Arizona don't know anything about the forced busing. So the debate the other night with Kamala Harris being a child on the bus, I wonder if she knew it was forced busing.
Yeah, she did. Of course.
Did she know it was forced busing? Did she know that the Americans' parents had no say in the matter? Even though they said the children were put on the buses without the parents' consent.
Yeah.
Did she know that?
Well, I pointed this out yesterday, and this is what Joe Biden has been trying to say, and thank you, Liz, for the call, is that there was some blowback among white people when busing was bringing mostly African Americans into white schools. But for white people who had bought houses in nice neighborhoods with good schools, which was made possible in large part by redlining, by the way, that was keeping black people out of those neighborhoods. When white people bought those houses, they did so because they wanted their kids to go to that school. And then when the busing extended, and this was not all over the United States, as you correctly point out, but it was, it was concentrated in a lot of areas. Then when it was extended to, sending white kids to schools that were a majority African American and were poor and underperforming schools, not because of the color of the people's skin, well, I guess indirectly, but because of redlining, because of property tax funding our schools, then the blowback got really intense, and that's when Joe Biden jumped into it, because that blowback was happening in Delaware, and he was basically saying this is not the way to do this. It was a mess. It was just a mess, and I'm not defending Biden, and and I think that busing, I thought it was a good thing. I continue to think that by and large it was a good thing, although it did create this incredible blowback, and we pulled back from it in large part. But we have to figure out a way to be a whole society. We have to figure out, and there's a lot of different solutions, and this raises a whole lot of issues that go way beyond busing or so-called forced busing. But we have, if we don't live together, we're going to die together. I mean, to paraphrase Ben Franklin, if we don't hang together, we'll hang separately, was his phrase. And that's probably a topic for a day that we take it as an entire hour. Michael in St. Louis, Missouri. Hey, Michael, what's up?
Yes. Hi, Tom. This morning, Congressman Pocan was talking about not understanding what child abuse or neglect is, the legal definition, and as well as a caller called in asking how you report it. And I have the answer to both. My wife and I were talking about this last night. Texas Department of Family and Protective Services report abuse, neglect, or exploitation has a 24-hour hotline and an online service available 24/7 nationwide. It's a central place to report child abuse and neglect.
Right.
Further, the legal definition of abuse and neglect is referenced on this site, and there's 60 words. Can I read 2 of them?
You may, certainly.
Mental or emotional injury to a child that results in an observable and material impairment in the child's growth, development, or physical functioning. B, causing or permitting the child to be in a situation in which the aforementioned was caused. That's abuse, and there's neglect. And it's a little bit more questionable in my mind, which leads me to believe that I'm sure it would seem that somebody's called this hotline, and if so, does this mean that the Department of Homeland Security and the Border Patrol are above Texas law?
Yes, they are. There's this thing called the Supremacy Clause that puts the federal government above the state governments, and this has been rigorously enforced since the Civil War. And I would add, Michael, I get your point that you could call your state hotline, and particularly in Texas, and say I'm reporting abuse, but those resources are very stretched thin, and they will not have the ability to go into these facilities, and they can't take on the federal government. Right.
That's correct, but it also applies.
But I don't want people calling those numbers and tying up telephone lines when people who are legitimately reporting and not to say this is illegitimate, but they can't do anything about it. But somebody calling up and talking about the neighbor next door has got their kid chained up in the basement. I don't want that call not to go through because so many people are calling to protest. The people to call, Michael, are your legislators. You've got one congressman or woman, and you've got 2 senators. And then you've got a whole bunch of state legislators. You have a state senator, you have a state representative, you've got a governor. Those are all people that you can and should be calling and absolutely raising hell with. Michael, I totally agree with your sentiment, but be careful.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
We'll be back. We're going to check in about 4 minutes with Bob Ney and find out what's going on in the world today. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Stick around. And welcome back. Judy in Hot Springs, Arkansas. Hey, Judy, what's on your mind today?
Oh, well, I'm glad I hung on the phone. Everybody's concerned about these issues, and I'm glad you brought on the guy from Iran because it's symptomatic of our problems with Trump and his ability to govern or not govern. He's a troublemaker, and he thrives on dissent and like you said, the limelight. Put the camera on me, and I'll do whatever you say. Mm-hmm. But we have to look at the total picture that the Supreme Court has reneged on its obligation to oversee the states and the gerrymandering. So now, come 2020, if we wait until then to bring Trump to task for his actions, there's not going to be anything we can fight them with because we don't have any rights as a voter because our rights will have been taken away by gerrymandering and suppression of the vote.
I agree. And John Roberts was the swing vote on this thing, and he basically said, I'm pitching in with the Republicans. We're going to let the Republicans rig these 30, I think they control 32 states now. We're going to let them rig these states so that, for decades, in South Carolina, for example, the last election was almost exactly 50-50, Democratic-Republican, and yet they sent 3 Democrats to the U.S. House of Representatives and 10 Republicans. That was because of gerrymandering. That's going to happen in every single Republican-controlled state after 2020 if the Republicans continue to control the state houses, the state senates, and the governor's offices, and that's where a lot of dark money is going to be flowing. We need to be paying attention to these races, Judy.
We've got to get into the states and take control at the state level. Yep. And McConnell is the puppet master of Trump. He may look like he's just sitting up there in the Senate, but he's pulling the strings that has Trump doing whatever he wishes, and nobody's doing anything about it because he's the boss. He has the last word.
I think it may be the other way around, Judy, because McConnell's up for re-election and he's running scared. And so he's trying to reach out to Trump's base, which is why he's sucking up to Trump, because without that Trump base, he is going to lose to a Democrat in Kentucky.
Well, Kentucky is getting a lot of benefits from his being in office, particularly with his Chinese wife and all the money that her family's dumping into the state.
Yeah, now you've got Oleg Deripaska, this Russian-Ukrainian billionaire who is all over the Mueller report, is pouring $200 million into Kentucky to build an aluminum factory there, again, to get votes for Mitch McConnell.
I was talking to a friend who just went over there to work the races, and she says the highways and everything over there is just fantastic. You can't believe the money that's spent in that state.
Yeah.
And do you think they're going to give that up?
Well, we'll see.
So.
I'm not. A lot of it is going to depend on how effective Mitch McConnell has been at convincing the people of Kentucky that it's all because of him. And I'm guessing he's been very effective at that. He's a slick political operator. He's got hundreds of millions of dollars in family money because of marrying Elaine Chao, and he's got the billionaires, particularly the Koch network, behind him and with him. So. But you're absolutely right, Judy. This is, and thank you for the call. This is devolving to the state level. And if you have not been paying attention to state politics, if you've not been paying attention to who your state representative is or your assembly person or whatever they call it in your state, and who your state senator is and who your governor is, now is the time to pay attention, because those races are going to be more important in 2020 than they've ever been in the history of the republic. Every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I, our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell the list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Let's check in with Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com. And loving what you do, Ellen Ratner's newest book. And on the line with us is Bob Ney, the author of Sideswiped, former congressman from Ohio. Bob, what's going on in the world?
Oh, good afternoon, Tom. Well, we're looking at the federal judge who has blocked the Trump administration policy denying the bond hearings, and that's the federal judge in Seattle.
This is bond hearings for refugees on the southern border.
Yes. Okay. Yes, sir, for the refugees in the southern border, and he blocked the policy, and this policy came up because Attorney General William Barr in April issued that order, which would prevent immigration judges from granting bail to asylum seekers. And that was the vow by President Trump to end the, quote, catch and release, where people are caught and then released in the sense of allowed to, go out about society until they would come back for their hearing.
Right, and over 90, my recollection was 96 or 97% of these folks actually come back and show up for their hearings, which Trump and the Republicans were just lying through their teeth about, saying these people would just go away and never come back. And that's absolutely not true. They want to have their hearing. They believe they have a case.
Well, yes, and they do come back. Now, of course, Attorney General Barr in April issued this order because you know how word gets back through communities, and if people thought that they would have to just sit in a detention center somewhere, a detention camp, for a year or two period, then the Trump administration would hope by them hearing that, they wouldn't come in the first place, for example.
Right,
and
that's
so
the
that
theory.
was the complete objective to it, and then the judge has said, hey, this is unconstitutional. Now, unlike the census, which they lost on, and they're not going to try to do anything because they would set that back so far, this will be different. This will continue probably, most likely, up through the United States Supreme Court with this case. There's no way that the Trump administration won't continue this case.
Yeah. Okay.
I would assume.
Yeah. Well, so there. So now, in the meantime, does that mean, is there a stay in effect? Does that mean that refugees who are in these facilities can actually have bail posted for them and they can get out, or does that mean that they still can't?
Oh, that would mean, I believe, that they still could. I mean, they can get bail posted. Now, if they take and do this into the appeals court, I don't know if they can do an emergency appeal on this or not, Tom. That I don't know.
Right. Okay. So we'll have to get some more information.
But I do want to make a point, though, because you've asked the right question. Here's the point. The Attorney General can make another rule, not the same rule, but some other rule that they could devise legally to once again put another hurdle through the system for asylum seekers, which comes back to the fact until there's some kind of comprehensive reform, which good luck in the Senate side of it, to spell these things out, they will continue to be the executive level decisions. In other words, the President of the United States.
And in the meantime, we're continuing to pay $750 per child per day to companies like the one that John Kelly is on the board of directors of, to house these children and refugees in basically dog kennels.
Oh, exactly. So,
mind-boggling.
Just because these court cases are coming, and just because, quote, temporarily the administration is lost, doesn't mean it's over with. Other new rules can be put on immediately.
Well, and if they deny them bail, then these for-profit corporations continue to get their $750 per person per day fee. So they've got to be lobbying the Republicans and the Trump administration to say, yeah, don't give them bail. You guys keep paying us.
Sure, it's privatization like private prisons. There's a lot of money in it.
Yeah. Exactly. And it's an abomination. This should not be happening in the United States of America.
It is.
Yeah.
Something I wanted to put on the radar screen in case people haven't heard of it. Companies are looking to design safety standards for driverless cars. And the reason that's going to be important, there's going to be a slew of companies, and they're going to try to define safety, what they call safety metrics and validation methods, and they're hoping to potentially cash in on an industry-wide standard for driverless cars. And, right now, there's current safety standards that govern the designs of our motor vehicles, right? But there's nothing, Tom, that covers the car's technical specs and the validation of those specs, how they're going to perform in a safety manner. And the reason I mention this is because this isn't going to be some legislative move through the Congress, the House and the Senate. This is most likely going to go through the White House. And there's not going to be a lot of attention paid to this. And if it goes through the White House, they do this in the form, the rulemaking process, which means they'll take in questions, they'll take in ideas and specifics, but they'll do what they want to do. Then the only way around this is for Congress to go overturn it.
So they just run it basically through the DOT, through, I think that's Elaine Chao, isn't it?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Because I heard her name mentioned while I was listening to come on the show.
Yeah.
And so, and we know who her husband is.
Right, Mitch McConnell. Yep.
Right. So therefore, this is a big deal. This is billions and billions of dollars. And number one, money-wise, it's also safety.
Yeah. So this is basically the car makers trying to get ahead of the legislative process, so they can nail this down before Congress does.
Through the executive.
Which could turn out well, or it could turn out to be a train wreck.
Or it could, and this is, like I said, this is a big deal safety-wise, and they're trying to get some industry standards. And right now, the sympathy towards them, and I did want to mention this, right now from the government, is for them to come up with their own voluntary standards.
Right. Fascinating stuff. I always learn something from you, Bob. Bob Ney with Talk Media News. Thank you so much, Bob.
Thank you.
Great talking with you, and have a happy 4th of July, my friend.
You too.
Thank you very much. Okay, up next, Alex Lawson is going to drop by. We're going to talk about the latest assaults on Social Security and Medicare from the Trump administration and the GOP.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
It's the Mueller report. We're on page 137. This is the part where they're talking about Paul Manafort's association with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska being the Ukrainian-Russian oligarch who is building the steel and aluminum factory in Kentucky to help Mitch McConnell get reelected in 2020. Manafort has alleged to the office, that's the Mueller office, that he was willing to brief Deripaska, this is the guy who's helping out Mitch McConnell, only on public campaign matters, and gave an example why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Page 138. Paul Manafort's 2 campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States is the subtitle here. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August of 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to that meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016. While in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the afternoon of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. The opposition bloc is the political entity in eastern Ukraine that's aligned with Russia. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with the subject line Black Caviar, Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle I'm prepared to do it. It has to do with the future of his country and is quite interesting." End quote. Page 139. Manafort identified, quote, "the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar" as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych, by the way, is the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine that Paul Manafort helped get elected. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. The rest of that sentence has been blocked out by Bill Barr. Manafort replied to Kilimnik's July 29 email, "Tuesday, August 2nd is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City." 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kilimnik flew back to Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kilimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Excuse me. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their version of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kilimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kilimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That would be the part of Ukraine that's mostly Russian-speaking. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kilimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the Mueller office that he had said to Kilimnik that the plan was crazy. It's the Mueller report.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com and you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
We say fight back!
8 convention and 96 Republican conventions Manafort ran. It's the Mueller report.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back, Thom Hartmann, to the third hour of our program. Thom Hartmann here with you. Fascinating hour with Congressman Mark Pocan. Our first hour, taking your calls for the day. We had an amazing conversation with Jamal Abdi, bringing us up to date on what's going on in Iran. In our second hour, we've been asking the question about Nike and the pre-Civil War icons to sell products. Haven't yet gotten to how is Trump making sure Fox News won't see the Mueller testimony. I'll get to that. And I got a few other rants I want to share with you. But I got a really, really concerning letter from my insurance company the other day, and it caused me to immediately say to Sean and Louise, who booked this show and produced this show, I want to talk to Alex Lawson over at SocialSecurityWorks.org and and find out what the heck is going on here. Alex, welcome back to the program.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
So glad to have you with us. And also, of course, you run the radio station, our affiliate in Washington, D.C. as well, We Act Radio. The letter that I got, and I'm not going to name my insurance company, but, they said as a Medicare supplement, policyholder. Now, I've got regular Medicare, Part A and Part B. And Part B, I think, only pays 80% of your cost for whatever it is it pays for. You can explain that to us in a second. And so I bought a supplemental policy that fills in that hole. And they said, you may have heard about upcoming changes regarding the availability of Medicare supplemental plans. With all the information that's out there, we want to make sure you know the facts. Effective January, now this is from my insurance company. Effective January 1st, and I have, like I said, Medicare with insurance, Medigap insurance that fills the holes that Republicans drilled into Medicare. Effective January 1st, 2020, the Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act of 2015, now that was pre-Trump, MACRA, won't allow those who become Medicare eligible after December 31st, 2019, which would be, people who become eligible for Medicare after the end of this year, to purchase plans that cover the Medicare Part B deductible. What the hell is going on here, Alex? Or am I, making a mountain out of a molehill here?
No, what you're doing is you're putting your finger exactly on the problem, which is that why is it so confusing? The truth of what this policy is you have this gap in Medicare, these holes that have been drilled in it, as you rightly say, and then to fill those holes, private insurers market different products. And at the same time, you have private insurers who are marketing an entirely separate form, a competitor of traditional Medicare called Medicare Advantage.
Which is not Medicare at all. It's fully privatized insurance that is getting money from the Medicare system, draining the Medicare system, in addition to getting premiums from us.
It's a parasite on the side of traditional Medicare with an explicit goal of destroying traditional Medicare.
Right, and they've taken about a third of everybody who is on Medicare and moved them over to these privatized Medicare Plus programs, or Medicare Advantage programs, excuse me.
And so now what you also see is conservatives who have, this is their goal. They want to destroy Medicare. So they're going to try to bias everything they can over to Medicare Advantage. So what you're dealing with, Tom, is the maze, the just Byzantine bureaucracy of trying to get the benefits that we pay for during our life, Medicare, right? Because now when you become eligible and every year after that, you have to make decisions that, really affect the bottom line and what's covered, including unknowns. And, don't worry, it's not that complicated because first you choose between traditional and Advantage. If you choose traditional, then you have to decide if you're going to get a supplemental insurance policy to cover the gap. And don't worry, there's only 10 choices there, and each one of those is extremely complex. Plus, 2 of the choices have high deductible or low deductible versions. And also, did I mention that's only in 47 states because in 3 states, they offer their own Medigap policies. So if you figured all that out and you're still with me, what's happening is that because you basically you have this conservative assault on Medicare to make traditional Medicare less attractive and try to push people over to Medicare Advantage, which does seem very attractive because it's like pretty simple. It's attractive right up until you need the insurance, right up until you need the care. And then people find out that Medicare Advantage can deny care because it's just private insurance.
Whoa.
But back on the supplemental side, what's happening is 2 of the products, C and F, are going away because, I'm not going to say that the economists are like in league with them, but they're just useful idiots often in the attack on our healthcare because of this whole concept of skin in the game. Oh, well, if people just have skin in the game, then they're going to, their economic choices are going to be different. And you're like, what is skin? They have skin in the game. This is medical care we're talking about. Right. What is the skin in the game in a blood transfusion?
Right. Well, and beyond that, Alex, I've got the F program, the low deductible one, and I'm paying, a lot of money for this. Several $100s a month for this Medigap policy because it's one of the very best ones, at least as I could figure out when I was shopping. And now they're saying that they're going to do away with it. Are they doing away with the ones that are the most comprehensive in covering all your expenses?
That's exactly what they're doing. So they, again, you obviously have skin in the game, right? It's great that you get to talk about this, because I think a lot of people faced with this feel really alone. Like, where do you go? The Medicare Rights Center is a great resource for people looking for information, but it's so complex. And you have F, which is first dollar. It covers the first dollar. You're paying money, but your insurance actually covers the entirety almost of the gap. The most of the gap that's covered is by F. So they're removing those two products, which are also by far the most popular product. So 2/3 of people who get supplemental insurance are on one of the two of those. They're actually the go-to, the default selections are those, and that'll change, I think, to G, which is another plan. But all of this is, as you know, just part of a concerted attack on the idea, which everyone wants, which is improved Medicare for all. When you explain it to people, when you don't use gotcha poll questions, and you say, hey, how about you pay less money, get better care, and can see whatever doctor you want when you need to see that doctor or provider. How does that sound to you? And everyone says, yes, that's what I want. No one likes their insurer, and that's why the big insurance has to play these games to really tilt the entire landscape to their advantage.
So it sounds to me like, if I'm interpreting what you're saying correctly, we're talking with Alex Lawson, the big cheese over at SocialSecurityWorks.org. It sounds like the insurance companies' lobbyists got into, and again, this was passed during the Obama administration, although Republicans controlled Congress. So, this, and it was part of a larger bill, so it might have just been snuck in. I don't know what. But because it was the Medicare Access and Chip Reauthorization Act. Basically, they said, okay, we're going to make it so that people who are not on Medicare Advantage, which are the privatized programs where when you get sick, they can start refusing to pay for you and maybe even throw you off the program. But for people who are on true Medicare, the 2/3 of Americans who are still on true Medicare and have a Medigap policy to fill in that 20% hole that the Republicans drilled in Medicare to begin with, that we're going to change the Medigap policies so they're not as comprehensive, so that, like I had back surgery in D.C. a couple of years ago, and I was over 65 when that happened. It was paid for by Medicare. I think when all was said and done, the entire bill, hospital stay, everything was like $500 or something like that. It was very, very little because I had a good Medigap policy and because I had Medicare. They want to change it so that if I go through that again and I continue to be on Medicare rather than Medicare Advantage. If I'm on Medicare Advantage, they can really mess with me. But if I'm on Medicare, it's instead of costing $500, it might cost a couple thousand. Is that what you're saying? Is that the bottom line here?
That is the bottom line, that these two products are not going to be available to folks after 2020, Medigap C and F. And yes, it was part of a much larger package, but that's how DC works. They slip these things into other places, and the whole package is too important for, to stop because of these little tiny poison pills. They're tiny in the big scheme of things, but then when, the bill comes due, they hurt real people. And we've seen that time and time and time again. And this is exactly why Medicare for some is actually a system that cannot stand, because they will continue to chip away at it forever. As long as the insurers are there, they will never stop attacking Medicare, which they see as their existential threat. And they should, because as long as we all see through this and keep raising our voices, we're going to improve Medicare, get rid of the gaps, cover vision, dental, and hearing, and then we're going to expand it to everyone in this country. And then you won't have to make any. There's not going to be A, B, C, D, E, F, G, anything. It's just going to be Medicare for everybody. You go to the provider when you need. Yeah,
my insurance company also says because you are already Medicare eligible, this change doesn't affect you or your Medicare supplement insurance policy. So basically, if I'm reading this right, if you turn 65 and get on Medicare before the end of this year, you can still grab one of these good plans, these F plans. I don't know anything about the C plan, but the F plan I've been on for years. And it will continue after that for you. But if you turn 65 after January 1st, 2020, you're screwed.
That's correct. It's just going forward. Obviously, it's slightly more complicated because that's the way policy works. Like, you just have to be eligible by then.
Right.
But yes, that's exactly correct. It's going forward. These two options will be removed from people.
So if you are on Medicare, if you have a Medicare Advantage plan, if you have a Medigap insurance plan that fills in the holes in Medicare Part B, then and you want to have good policy, good coverage, now is the time to talk to your insurance agency about making sure that you can get into one of these plans if that's your goal, right?
Yeah, and I think, everyone has to look at their own choices, but it's a good time to look at your needs right now.
Yeah, amen. And you can find a whole pile of information about Social Security and Medicare and everything else over at socialsecurityworks.org, which is, of course, Alex's organization. Alex Lawson. Alex, you're the best. Thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Tom.
Good talking with you. We'll be right back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
I should have known, right? It's the insurance companies and their lobbyists, working with the Republicans and the Blue Dogs to try to screw us all again. Jeez. And welcome back. Let's see here. Let's pick up some phone calls. David in Woodland Hills, California. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
This is a question for you and the congressman, and I would hope that you would ask him in the future. But I would like to know why everyone is forgetting about interstate crosscheck, which, in my opinion, is more responsible for the Republicans stealing the election. And finally, Tom, in my job, I meet people from all walks of life, and I have asked hundreds of them, and none of them, not even the most educated liberals you can imagine, not one has ever heard of interstate crosscheck.
Oh, my God. Okay, and for those people who are listening right now or watching who don't know what interstate crosscheck is, this is a program that Chris Kobach, the guy who is also the author of Senate Bill 1029 in Arizona, the Show Your Papers, Please, that got declared unconstitutional. This is a program that he put together where states throw in their voter databases, and if they find even similar names, Jose Michael Hernandez in Arizona, Jose Michael Hernandez in New York, then they simply remove both of them from the voting rolls on the assumption that this is somebody who is trying to illegally vote in two states. And it disproportionately hits those ethnic groups that have a small pool of names. White people, by and large, come from all kinds of different European countries, Slavic languages, Romance languages, Greek, all kinds. And so there's this huge diversity of names among white people. Now, among African Americans, there's a much smaller diversity of names. Many of their names were given them at the end of slavery. And among Asian people and Hispanic people, all of their names, virtually all of their names, came out of Spanish. So there's a very small pool of names there, and among Native among Native Americans also. Well, there you may have a little more diversity, but among Asian Americans also a very small pool of names. And so, when you run basically millions and millions of names from states all over the country through the interstate crosscheck computer system, basically, it's going to kick out, a few white people, but it's going to kick out massive numbers, in particular of Hispanics and Asians and African Americans. And thus they're denied the right to vote. And as a result of this, you saw Wisconsin throwing over 200,000 people off the voting rolls, Michigan a couple 100,000, Ohio, Pennsylvania, every single one of them, 6 figures thrown off the voting rolls. In Georgia, it was over 1 million people thrown off the voting rolls just in time for the 2016 election. And so, interstate crosscheck has now died, by the way, David, but its children continue to live. And so, this is continuing to go on. And I think you're absolutely right. Trump would not be in office if they hadn't thrown those hundreds of thousands of people off the voting rolls in state after state after state. And I think, frankly, he's planning on that And he's also hoping that the oligarchs that he's sucking up to, who have really good technical skills in their countries, whether it's Russia, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Saudi Arabia, that those people will hack the election. And this is why Mitch McConnell's refusing to allow the 12 states that don't even have paper ballots or audit trails to harden their election systems. It's a scam.
It appeared to me that even Jimmy Carter, with his great statement the other day, it appears that even he doesn't know about it.
I'm guessing he does, but, they had asked him a specific question about Russian interference, and so, that's what he was answering. But, Jimmy Carter gets it. I mean, on this program, he said, we're no longer a democracy, we're an oligarchy, and that was like 4 or 5 years ago. David, thank you for the call. Spot on, excellent point. One of my favorite rants. Thank you very much. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. One of my producers, I don't want to get into the names because I don't want your name taken off this list, is apparently secretly on Newt Gingrich's email list. And, or maybe not so secretly, I don't know. But anyhow, Newt sent one of my producers this email, and I just have to share it with you. This is what's going out to Republicans all over the country. Emails cost virtually nothing to send. So, he may even be buying millions of names. Maybe that's how we ended up with it. He's just, bought names of people who are political donors or names of people who are politically active, or God only knows where he bought the mailing list, right? But this is the email. It's titled The Cruel Dishonesty of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And, once again, I want to make the point that I made in the first hour of this program with Congressman Pocan. In fact, it's how we opened the show. I brought this up and I asked him what he thought about it. In my opinion, the reason why the Trump administration allowed that Inspector General report from DHS about the cruel conditions, the inhumane conditions, the illegal conditions down on the southern border in these Border Patrol detention facilities, concentration camps, allowed that report to go out, is because Trump is not embarrassed or ashamed of this. Stephen Miller is not embarrassed or ashamed of this. They're proud of it. They want their white racist base, their Fox News watching, racially hysterical white base, they want these folks to know how cruel they can be to people of color. They are delighting in it. They're reveling in it. They're bragging about it. And on top of that, they're paying John Kelly's company now $750 per child per day to keep them in prison, to keep them in dog cages. So, first of all, you have to understand, these guys are celebrating this. And then comes this kind of stuff from Newt Gingrich. And I'm quoting from his letter. I'll just read you the first 2 paragraphs. It took Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's visit to the border and her dishonest comments afterwards to help me understand how profoundly vicious, cruel, and dishonest she is. When you look at the larger picture, it is clear that Ocasio-Cortez is eager and determined to undermine and destroy America as we know it. Now, she's getting death threats on a regular basis. You think this is going to help? He goes on, when your goals are that radical, lying is simply part of the game. When you despise American values and find the American people deplorable and contemptible, lying is perfectly natural. And then he describes Ocasio-Cortez's type of, quote, vicious, deliberately dishonest politics. This is how vicious and deliberately dishonest the Republican Party has become. This is new. I mean, remember, Newt Gingrich was the one who came up with the word list back in 1996, where he said he came up with 2 lists of words, good words and bad words, and said Republicans need to memorize these words, patriotic, stand tall, all this kind of stuff, and then use these adjectives whenever you're describing Republicans or Republican policies. And whenever you describe Democrats or Democratic policies, never use the word Democratic, always use the word Democrat. And like, Joe McCarthy used to say, emphasize the rat. And of course, the name of the party is the Democratic Party. It was named that by Thomas Jefferson. But,
number one. And number two, use words like, elite and snob and ivory tower and all this, liberal and all this kind of stuff. This is the new Gingrich who has been engineering language forever. And he's now, in my opinion, trying to get Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez assassinated. This is what it looks like to me, particularly given how widely this is being distributed. This is despicable. We'll be back. It's 27 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And I'll be picking up your calls. A lot to talk about today, right after this break. Stick around. It's the Mueller report. We're on page 137. This is the part where they're talking about Paul Manafort's association with Konstantin Kilimnik and Oleg Deripaska. Deripaska being the Ukrainian-Russian oligarch who is building the steel and aluminum factory in Kentucky to help Mitch McConnell get reelected in 2020. Manafort has alleged to the office, that's the Mueller office, that he was willing to brief Deripaska, this is the guy who's helping out Mitch McConnell, only on public campaign matters, and gave an example, why Trump selected Mike Pence as the vice presidential running mate. Manafort said he never gave Deripaska a briefing. Manafort noted that if Trump won, Deripaska would want to use Manafort to advance whatever interest Deripaska had in the United States and elsewhere. Page 138. Paul Manafort's two campaign period meetings with Konstantin Kilimnik in the United States is the subtitle here. Manafort twice met with Kilimnik in person during the campaign period, once in May and again in August of 2016. The first meeting took place on May 7, 2016 in New York City. In the days leading to that meeting, Kilimnik had been working to gather information about the political situation in Ukraine. That included information gleaned from a trip the former Party of Regions official Yuri Boyko had recently taken to Moscow, a trip that likely included meetings between Boyko and high-ranking Russian officials. Kilimnik then traveled to Washington, D.C. on or about May 5, 2016. While in Washington, Kilimnik had prearranged meetings with State Department employees. Late on the afternoon of May 6th, Gates arranged for Kilimnik to take a 3 a.m. train to meet Manafort in New York for breakfast on May 7th. According to Manafort, during the meeting, he and Kilimnik talked about events in Ukraine, and Manafort briefed Kilimnik on the Trump campaign, expecting Kilimnik to pass the information back to individuals in Ukraine and elsewhere. Manafort stated that opposition bloc members recognized Manafort's position on the campaign was an opportunity, but Kilimnik did not ask for anything. Kilimnik spoke about a plan of Boyko to boost election participation in the eastern zone of Ukraine, which was the base for the opposition bloc. Kilimnik returned to Washington, D.C. right after the meeting with Manafort. The opposition bloc is the political entity in eastern Ukraine that's aligned with Russia. Manafort met with Kilimnik a second time at the Grand Havana Club in New York City on the evening of August 2nd, 2016. The events leading to the meeting are as follows. On July 28, 2016, Kilimnik flew from Kiev to Moscow. The next day, Kilimnik wrote to Manafort requesting that they meet using coded language about a conversation he had that day. In an email with the subject line Black Caviar, Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar several years ago. We spent about 5 hours talking about his story, and I have several important messages from him to you. He asked me to go and brief you on our conversation. I said I have to run it by you first, but in principle, I'm prepared to do it. It has to do with the future of his country and is quite interesting." End quote. Page 139. Manafort identified, quote, "the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar" as Yanukovych. He explained that in 2010, he and Yanukovych had lunch to celebrate the recent presidential election. Yanukovych, by the way, is the pro-Russian former president of Ukraine that Paul Manafort helped get elected. Yanukovych gave Manafort a large jar of black caviar that was worth approximately $30,000 to $40,000. Manafort's identification of Yanukovych as the guy who gave you your biggest black caviar jar is consistent with Kilimnik being in Moscow, where Yanukovych resided, when Kilimnik wrote, "I met today with the guy," and with a December 2016 email in which Kilimnik referred to Yanukovych as BG. The rest of that sentence has been blocked out by Bill Barr. Manafort replied to Kalimnik's July 29 email, Tuesday, August 2nd is best, Tuesday or Wednesday in New York City. 3 days later, on July 31st, 2016, Kalimnik flew back from Kiev from Moscow, and on that same day wrote to Manafort that he needed about 2 hours for their meeting because it is a long caviar story to tell. Kalimnik wrote that he would arrive at JFK on August 2nd at 7:30 p.m., and he and Manafort agreed to a late dinner that night. Excuse me. Documentary evidence, including flight, phone, and hotel records, and the timing of text messages exchanged, confirms the dinner took place as planned on August 2nd. As to the contents of the meeting itself, the accounts of Manafort and Gates, who arrived late to the dinner, differ in certain respects. But their version of events, when assessed alongside available documentary evidence and what Kalimnik told business associate Sam Patton, indicate that at least 3 principal topics were discussed. First, Manafort and Kalimnik discussed a plan to resolve the ongoing political problems in Ukraine by creating an autonomous republic in its more industrialized eastern region of Donbass, and having Yanukovych, the Ukrainian president ousted in 2014, elected to head that republic. That would be the part of Ukraine that's mostly Russian-speaking. That plan, Manafort later acknowledged, constituted a backdoor means for Russia to control eastern Ukraine. Manafort initially said that if he had not cut off the discussion, Kalimnik would have asked Manafort in the August 2nd meeting to convince Trump to come out in favor of the peace plan, and Yanukovych would have expected Manafort to use his connections in Europe and Ukraine to support the plan. Manafort also initially told the Mueller office that he had said to Kalimnik that the plan was crazy. It's the Mueller report. You know, every day here on the Thom Hartmann Program, Louise and I and our team, Sean, Nate, Shira, Dave, Chase, Sue, Nigel, Ron, we all work to put together the very, very best show we possibly can. And there's an enormous amount of work that goes into the show. And one of the things that comes out of that is a lot of content, a lot of specific information that we go through and we dig out and, we want to share with you. And Sue puts that into our newsletter every week. And I think you will, if you don't already receive our newsletter, it comes in email every day, about an hour after we're off the air, or maybe a couple hours after we're off the air. And Sue goes through and pulls literally every link to every story that we talked about and puts it into the newsletter. It's free. We don't sell a list or anything. You complete safety and security. There's no charge. There's no nothing. Just, plug in your email address over at thomhartmann.com. And you get signed up for the newsletter. It's all fairly obvious. You'll see it on the website. So check it out, thomhartmann.com. Thank you.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Check it out. You can find the links over at thomhartmann.com. That's over at thomhartmann.com and at patreon.com/Thom Hartmann. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Before I pick up your phone calls, I just wanted to share a couple of sentences with you here. The president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, this is the licensing agency or accreditation agency for pediatricians, and basically the umbrella organization for doctors who work with children. That's pediatricians nationwide. The president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, Dr. Zaragoza, was allowed to tour 2 of the Customs and Border Protection facilities where these children are locked up. And what she had to say is just devastating. I'm quoting. This is the president of the American Academy of Pediatrics, a physician, a doctor. She said, when they opened the door, the first thing that hit us was a smell. It was the smell of sweat, urine, and feces. And then she continues, and this is where it sounds to me like what she's describing is that the Trump administration has broken these children, has just broken them. And you'll understand what I'm saying when you hear this. She continues, and I heard crinkling to my left, and I looked over there, and there was a sea of silver. There were young children in there, unaccompanied boys in there, and they had no expression on their faces. It was a room full of silent children. There was no laughing, there was no joking, there was no talking. All I could hear was the rustle of those silver mylar blankets. I described them almost like dog cages with people in each of them, and the silence was just hard to watch, hard to see.
We have broken these children the way that you break a prisoner of war. Kids who don't laugh, kids who don't talk. I'm just devastated. Jeff in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind?
Good morning, Tom. Thanks as always for your patriotic truth-telling and for taking my call.
Thank you.
It's an honor to talk to you right before the 4th of July. So someone earlier mentioned the upcoming Mueller testimony. I want to ask you about that, but I'd like to do it in the context of establishment versus non-establishment Democrats. And it's worth noting, as you often do, that our last three Democratic presidents, Carter, 76, Bill Clinton, 92, Barack Obama in 2008, have all come from outside the establishment. Although I'll concede that time served in D.C. has nothing to do necessarily with that, and case in point is Bernie. Rather, Tom, I'd say it has more to do with the comfort level with the status quo. So as Mueller is about to step into the spotlight again, and Trump's campaign manager, his national security advisor, and his personal lawyer are all sitting in jail, my question to you, Tom, is twofold. Number one...
And by the way, if I could just add, Jeff, before you ask the question, they're all sitting in jail for doing things that Trump told them to do. Back to you.
Sure. Okay, yeah, definitely. And, number one, just as John Dean's chief concern during Watergate was whether our then President Richard Nixon was being blackmailed by the Watergate burglars, don't we now also deserve to know, beyond a shadow of a doubt, whether our so-called president is being blackmailed if there was some kind of quid pro quo with the Russians or whoever? And number two, Tom, in your opinion, is Nancy Pelosi, is she independent enough from the status quo, from business as usual governing, to be able to strike when the iron's hot and give us the impeachment inquiry our democracy demands? Right. And as Bernie would put it, does she have the guts to do it? And if not...
Jeff, I think she does. Is the bottom line. Although my patience is wearing very, very thin. To your first point, I don't think that Donald Trump is being blackmailed. I think he's being bribed. He already has several Trump towers in the Philippines. He's supporting Duterte, basically, who's turning the Philippines into an autocratic strongman government. I believe that he's probably already cut a deal with the Russian government, with Putin and friends and the oligarchs over there, to build a Trump tower in Russia, and maybe even in the Donbass part of Ukraine. Who knows? He's got Trump towers in Turkey, and so he's in tight with the Turkish dictator. Now, pick your country, right? Your right-wing authoritarian country. And Trump has got a hotel there. I think that frankly, I think that he's cut a deal with Kim Jong-un that when the North opens up, he's going to have a Trump tower in Pyongyang. I really think that this is all about all about the Benjamins, as the old saying goes. It's all about the money. It's all about the $100 bills. It's all about getting as many as he can, and that's what I think is going on, Jeff. Jeff, thank you for the call. Valerie in Phoenix, Arizona. Hey, Valerie, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. I just read an article. It says fear-based anger is an intoxicant like alcohol that alters the mental state of a person and drives them to commit terrible acts that they would not do under normal circumstances. So, I'm wondering if we could come up with a 12-step program to help sober up the Republicans, and we could call it Republicans Anonymous.
Yeah, you're saying basically that they're drunk on power. Is that it?
They're drunk on fear-based anger.
Wow.
It says fear-based anger is an intoxicant like alcohol.
Yeah, I get it. I get it. Your phone is fading in and out, Valerie. But you're making a very serious point here. The 12-step program, I realize is intended to lighten it up a little bit, but it really is. These guys are promoting fear and hate, and we have a long tradition of that in this country. The most notable organization that has done that for years and years is the Klan, but now increasingly it's the Republican Party as well. Like the letter from Newt Gingrich that I shared with you just a few minutes ago. And, the reason why McConnell is not obeying the laws is because he believes he can get away with it. And so far, he has gotten away with it. And I don't know if he's ever going to be held accountable.
history, I think, will hold him accountable as one of the slimiest, least ethical, particularly, taking away President Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court, leaders of the Senate, literally in the history of the United States Senate. Valerie, thank you. A cogent point, certainly a cogent point. Pilar in Richland, Washington. Hey, Pilar, what's up?
Thank you so much for taking my call. I discovered you a year ago. I listen every day with great gratitude.
Thank you.
For the education, for the advocacy you provide all of us who are so disheartened on many days.
Yeah.
So, I'm a strong progressive, but I saw Trump winning, and I can see it again. And many things you've already mentioned today, I just wanted to put in my own words if I could. And but for me, the immigrant crisis has magnified and provided an opportunity to win. So we've taken their bait. We showed our compassion towards immigrants, but we must emphasize our compassion for all people, because in opposition, except for the wealthy, Trump only has cruelty for all people.
Yeah.
And it's easy to witness through the policies he shares and shows all the time, and you share with us and remind us about. So my point is that people in stress can only care about their present life, not the future of immigrants or anybody else. So we have to show how his policies have been cruel. Every time we're reminded of the immigrants, we have to remind them of their life and their situation and talk about them because they are the reason that he won and they are the reason that he will win again because we're not focusing on their life.
Yeah.
He's creating a crisis so we can focus on the immigrants and not on them.
Well, and when this...
And realize...
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
finish up your rant here.
Oh,
it's a good one.
I didn't want
Yeah,
to forget
finish
anything.
it up.
Oh, thank you. I just want to say that, and I also, on a side note, I haven't been able to shake the fact that they were asked in the debates about the question about, do we want to give medical insurance to immigrants? And, and I thought that was a really dirty question, and it was
a Fox News talking point, Pilar. And what astonished
where did that come from? I never even imagined a question like that.
Yeah, what astonished me was that none of the Democrats said what is the easy answer to that stupid question, which is, well, gee, the commentator, whoever it is, Anderson Cooper or something, it was MSNBC, but, Chuck Todd, gee, Chuck, would you, if you were walking down the street in Washington, D.C., or sitting next to somebody in a restaurant who happened to be an undocumented immigrant and they had tuberculosis and they were coughing, would you feel comfortable? Wouldn't you want them to be...
people can only relate to real-life situations.
Yeah, exactly.
Examples that affect their life. We have to show how that affects their life every day. And sharing our vision of the future won't matter if your present is bad, but he is the one destroying your present.
Yes, and that brings us to this larger issue that Mark Pocan talked about in the first hour when I opened the show with this very issue that Trump and his cruelty toward brown people down south basically is something that actually is gaining him the love and adoration of these white racists, who make up much, if not most, of his base, and it's like we have to acknowledge that. I don't know what else to say, but the other point, the point that Pocan made is that for white working class people. And probably some black working class people as well. There's the substantial black middle class now that came about in throughout the 50s, 60s, in particular the 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s. That the sales pitch that Trump is making is the reason why you're not making as much money as your father's generation did. The reason why you can't, with a single breadwinner, buy a house, have a new car every 2 years and take a vacation and retire with a pension. The reason for that is because these brown people are coming to take your job. And basically the message that Republicans were giving to white people, well, Democrats actually, when it was the racist Democrats back in the 30s, was the same thing, only they were pointing it at black people rather than brown people. But the truth is that the reason why working class people of all races, but particularly this is focused at white working class people, the truth is that the reason why it takes more than two people working in a household to have the same standard of living that you could have had with one person working in 1980 has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with immigration. It has to do with Ronald Reagan destroying unions. It has to do with Reaganism and the whole economic policy. It has to do with Reagan dropping the top tax rate so that billionaires and corporations started keeping the money rather than cycling it through the the economy or cycling it back into programs that help people. And it has to do with this libertarian ideology that's infected the Republican Party. So, Pilar, thank you for the call. It was a great rant, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to respond with my own. We'll be back with more of your calls in just a moment.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
It's 46 minutes past the hour. We'll be right back. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, fair and only slightly unbalanced. Welcome back. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, easy mistake to make. Sometimes when I'm writing my own name, I write Erie. So,
okay. So what's up?
Listen, oh my God, everything going on today. But where I started like an hour ago was on this immigration issue and some of these really just racist, xenophobic remarks that are coming out against it. I tuned into Washington Journal on C-SPAN this morning, and a lot of the callers were complaining about assimilation.
Right.
And I think it's time for those of us in the non-xenophobic portion of society to start asking back of those people about their level of assimilation as proud, white, native-born Americans who haven't been able to assimilate to things like the 8th Amendment or the 13th Amendment abolishing slavery, or 19th giving women equal rights, or the 23rd.
Well, actually, I think, Eric, more on the nose would be to say, oh, you want everybody to assimilate. So you're suggesting that the St. Patrick's Day, that we should stop celebrating St. Patrick's Day because it's Irish?
Oh, my God, I'd start there. In Erie, Pennsylvania, the vomiting never ends. I mean, this town is...
From all the green beer, right. And then you've got Columbus Day, which is now, more or less an Italian and Spanish holiday, mostly Italian. Do you want to do away with that? Is that really what you're talking about? And at that point, they'll go, oh, my God, no, I'm only talking about brown people.
Oh, no, Tom, those are a tradition.
Right. Right.
Yeah. Listen, I just brought in a new cat 48 hours ago, and even my 6 cats here know how to assimilate somebody new, and they can manage that. So we, as a complex species with the rule of law, that we fail at it is somehow amazing to me.
Yeah, I'm with you. Eric, thank you. That's an excellent issue, and you said it very well. I appreciate the call, and thank you for sitting on hold so long. I appreciate it. Mark in Valley, Washington. Hey, Mark, what's up?
Hi, how you doing?
Good.
Hey, that intro you came with the doctor at the camps really hit a nerve because above and beyond the moral outrage, it's this double standards. This thing hits me personally. My son was helping some people when he was 24, move some furniture across a neighborhood in his Toyota pickup. It was a short distance, so he puts one of his friend's 10-year-old kid in the back of the truck to keep an eye on stuff. And so going around a turn, one of the dressers starts to tumble out. The kid goes after it, pulls him out. He ends up busting his head open. Now, I'm not saying my son should walk from this, but they charged him with felony child abuse with grave bodily harm and gave him a strike. He spent 10 months in jail, and he's looking at 7.5 years in prison if he screws up on parole.
Yeah, that's what happens if you put a kid in the back of a pickup truck and go out on the road.
Well, they were just going across the neighborhood. They weren't going on a road. I'm talking they never broke 15 miles an hour. They were going across a small neighborhood.
Yeah, well, that's a good thing, because if they'd been going faster, that kid would be dead.
No, he didn't hit the major highway. This was all slow speed.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is he had the mother and the kid testifying on his behalf that it was an accident. He gets felony child abuse with a strike.
Right.
We have the whole Trump administration and DHS purposely harming thousands of children. No child abuse.
Right. Yeah, and, I would be inclined to say their day will come, but the day never came for the torturers in the Bush administration. In fact, one of the lead torturers is now the director of the CIA. So I'm losing my faith in accountability in the American system until enough good people of conscience get into government and start holding these people accountable. People like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Mark, thank you for your thoughts. I appreciate it.
Talk media for the sane among us. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Tim in Beaverton, Oregon. Hey, Tim, what's on your mind today?
You know, and it's on the news quite often on most of the channels tomorrow. Trump's going to turn a traditional July 4th celebration into a Trump rally for his campaign. This is scary stuff.
Well, he did it. He did it to the Boy Scouts. He did it to the CIA.
Yeah, but can you imagine how many people are going to be watching that? And how
I don't know. I'm not going to be watching it. I don't give a rat's ass what he has to say.
His base is because he's been vindicated by the Mueller report. That's the kind of ideology they have. Yeah. What he needs to do is invite his friends from Charlottesville up, and then put some signs behind him that say "Make America White Again" with a few swastikas on there, and have the troops that go by with those tanks do the goose step like his buddy Kim Jong-un's troops do. Yeah. That's what he would want to do. There's no question in my mind.
Well, you may get that. I mean, the last president who tried to make the 4th of July celebration about himself was Richard Nixon in 1970. And what happened was tens of thousands of protesters descended on the mall. And Nixon wasn't even trying to speak. He was just trying to make it a celebration, right? That would, be bring out the patriots, right? The silent majority. And the protesters were, Nixon never tried it again. And he was president for another 4 years. So this may backfire in a big way on Trump, not to mention the fact that the weather forecast is, drenching rain and low ceilings, which might do away with his, Blue Angels flyover and his fireworks. But we'll see.
Yeah, and there is no climate change.
Yes, right. Right. Yeah. Excellent points all, Tim.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
All right. Thanks for talking to me.
Good talking with you. Thanks a lot for the call. Eric in Seattle. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind?
Hello, Tom.
Yeah.
Okay, so this thing with Nike and the flag.
Yeah.
Nike, of course, is a money-making entity. Yep. And, they are exploiting the flag. And, the flag is a national symbol. And, agreed, it's a powerful one. Like, if you're overseas or somewhere and you see the flag, hey, you feel safe.
But keep in mind, it's not the current American flag that Nike had put on these shoes. It was the so-called Betsy Ross flag. It wasn't actually designed by her, but she's given credit for it. And, with the 13 stars in a circle. And because that was a pre-Civil War flag, that was our flag during a brief period of time when we were a slave nation. Colin Kaepernick had warned Nike, the right-wingers, the Pepe the Frog people, they're going to adopt these shoes as kind of the official shoes of the racist right wing. And, Nike didn't listen, and they rolled the shoes out anyway. And sure enough, that's exactly what happened. And now Mitch McConnell is saying, I want to buy the first pair. Back to you, Eric.
Okay. Well, I guess my understanding of that, flag, the treatment of the American flag. Right. If time has operated so that that's no longer or never was an American flag, so be it. But there's all these rules. If the flag touches the ground, you're supposed to burn it.
Right.
If the flag is
Abby Rubin got arrested for wearing a flag.
Oh,
for turning a flag into a shirt.
Exactly. You're not
back during the Nixon era.
Right, you're not supposed to turn the flag into fashion or put it on clothing or that sort of thing.
Although the Trumpettes are doing that now, the maggots.
Well, and I've heard this comment before. It's like the flag, for those people that really, super patriots, you were talking about patriotism, and then, the flag is a fetish.
Yeah, it absolutely is. Eric, I want to. Your point was well made. I want to get one last call in here before the end of the show. Mary in Tucson, Arizona. Mary, you are on the air. You have the last minute.
Hi, thanks very much. I just wanted to ask everybody: have you looked inside your Nike shoes? Where are they made? They're not made in the U.S.
Right, never were.
All this, they're China. They're Sri Lanka, they're Venezuela, they're Vietnam. Before you start getting all upset, look in them.
Well, on the one hand, that's true of most shoes. In fact, that's true of most products. Walk around in a Walmart, and you can wander around a Walmart for an hour looking for a single product made in the USA and not find one. But that said, I have to congratulate or salute Nike for making Colin Kaepernick the face of the company.
That was a huge move. That was a very bold move. And, Phil Knight and the guys, the men and women who are running Nike and their marketing department, they took a huge chance on that. And, they should have listened to his advice, I think, on this Betsy Ross flag. But Mary, yes, we need to bring our manufacturing back. And wouldn't it be nice if Nike was making shoes in the United States again, or to begin with?
Well, we did not look for that union label.
There you go. Yeah, now I remember those ads from the Ladies Garment Union. Look for the union label. There you go. Mary, thank you so much for the call. And thank you all for being with us today. It seems to never end. I hope you have a wonderful 4th of July. Great time with friends and family, and use it as an opportunity, if appropriate, not to get into fights with people, but to wake people up. Tell them about our show, for example. And don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport. It starts with you. So get out there, get active, tag, you're it. We'll see you.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.